more time. Hi. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Travis SuperTrav Travioli. Had a little bit of a technical problem the first time, but if you're watching this on YouTube, I guess you won't even know. How would you know? You wouldn't. I might cut this part out. Probably not. Anyway, for those who don't know who I am, once again, my name is Travis SuperTrav Travioli, and what we are doing today is another episode of TravTalks, but this time, instead of just getting, say, like with Carl's, we got like double the curly hair. Pretty dope. You know, we've had people who, you know, we both played like near collegiate level sports. Pretty cool. But nope, this time you get even closer with another Travis. And that's pretty exciting, in my opinion. Would love for y'all to welcome, possibly once again, if you're already here, to our other Travis. Welcome in, my friend. Are you here? Yes, you are. Hi.
I am here.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome for a second or third time, however many times we've done this so far. The YouTube will never know. You'll never know. I'll never tell. Well, welcome in, my friend. Would you like to introduce yourself for the first time? Or I'm just gonna confuse everybody.
Just keep them guessing.
Never know. Content. Go ahead.
All right. My name's KillerDraco, not KillerDraco, specifically that way, so people won't ask me if I'm associated with Harry Potter in any way, shape, or form. So I don't really vibe with that. But yeah, I'm also a Travis.
Pretty crazy.
Yep.
Pretty crazy. And we have, ironically, or not ironically, just coincidentally, I suppose, very together almost jobs.
Yeah, our jobs, they're not the same, but they work in tandem pretty frequently. I would say.
Yeah. Do you care to explain what you do to the lovely people out there?
Absolutely. After all, that's why I'm here. Well, officially, I am a court liaison and I work in child services. To give the long and short, child services is that agency that people call when children are abused, neglected, or abandoned.
Yeah.
And I've been pretty much in child services for about 10 years now. I actually came straight out of college, got a job as a case manager, which is basically a glorified social worker who works with kids who are in foster care or in out-of-home care would be the more broad term because it can include kids placed with relatives, not just in foster homes. Did that for about 2 to 3 years and then became a case manager supervisor, which is more of the same, but also manages the case managers below them. It's effectively middle management in the child services world, but that was probably my least favorite of the jobs, specifically because you're high enough where everything is your fault if something goes wrong, but low enough that if it's not done, you still have to do it yourself.
Okay. That is not the most fantastic position I've ever heard of.
No, I hated it. But that was what led me to my current position, which is the court liaison. Basically, my role is I'm the go-between between the Department of Children and Families, DCF, and the judicial system in my county. Because in every state, the judicial system for the child services goes by county. They're split up into circuits. So you have circuit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on and so forth, with however many circuits there are in that state. So that actually had kind of an interesting journey because I've been a court liaison for a while, but not with the same agency. Long story short, the way DCF works in my state is they subcontract to case management organizations. So they will contract with a lead agency that kind of just oversees all the child welfare doings in the county.
Right.
And then that lead agency will subcontract to the individual case management organizations that are handling the specific cases that deal with each child. So I was at one of those subcontracted agencies when I was a case manager, when I was a case manager supervisor, and then when I was a court liaison. It was actually the first court liaison. I was kind of the pilot in that county, if you want to think of it that way. But eventually I moved over to the lead agency, although there was some drama involved there with the agency I was previously with, but that's another matter altogether.
Sure.
And yeah, for the last 2 years or so, I've been one of the court liaisons for the lead agency, but we have it split up so that each court liaison is in a specific courtroom. Because even though, like, we have one whole circuit that deals with it, we have like 4 judges and 3 general magistrates. So it's important to make sure that we always have somebody in the courtrooms to be able to kind of be that go-between between the judiciary and the Department of Children and Families. And that's the abbreviated version.
I can't believe that was the abbreviated version. That is one heck of a title, you know, and a lot of people, I feel like the most common thing that you hear about Child and Family Services or DCF or you know, like all the other terms that come from that world, you're kind of the bad guys.
Yeah, you're not wrong. You're not wrong, because I've done the front end stuff, so I've been there where even though we're not the investigators, because the investigators are the ones who, for lack of a better term, they take your kids.
Right.
Because they're the ones who have to go into the home, determine if there is a safety concern, and if it's not something that can be remedied, then they have to remove the child from that environment. At that point, the case management organization comes in, and their job is to try to find what we call permanency for that kid, or kids, because it can sometimes be sibling groups. But generally speaking, it's one case per mother. So you could have one case that has 5 different fathers for 5 different kids, but it's still under one case umbrella. But if you have one dad who has cases with 3 different mothers, then that's 3 different cases.
Wow.
So yeah, but the down and short of it is that even though we're not being the ones who directly take the kids, we become the ones that the parents and the kids by extension deal with on a daily, weekly basis. So a lot of their frustrations, a lot of their anger is directed towards us, and understandably so, because they don't really designate the investigator from the case manager from whoever. They just see the Department of Children and Families as a whole, and right then in that moment, the person before them is the Department of Children and Families.
Right.
So yeah, we face a lot of backlash. Less so in my current position, because I'm less on the front lines. I mean, we can get into specifics about what my current role entails, but I will say that the case manager position is a very thankless job. You tend to have, well, long story short, the statute says they want to see cases resolved within a year of the removal. So in a perfect world, that means things get resolved in a year.
Yeah, totally.
We don't live in a perfect world.
No.
So sometimes they take 2 years, sometimes they take 3 years, sometimes they take more. But ultimately, during however long it takes, you tend to be facing a lot of hostility, frustration, etc. But once you reach that kind of end of the road, that's when you finally get the thanks.
Right.
Because whether you're reunifying those children with their families, or if they have to go a different route and they have to terminate the parental rights and then have the children be adopted instead, you typically don't really see those thanks until you've just reached the very, very end.
Right. And every level of that just gets so complicated, more and more complications, more and more things change, so many variables. And working in that field, I used to work in foster care for a hot minute. So I was working with a lot of people from it was DOH, so Department of Human Services, but I was working with a lot of them to kind of be like, well, this is kind of what the kid is telling me, and I can only give you so much because of HIPAA, but like, this is kind of where I see this happening, and it is yeah, it's a thankless job. There's something to be said for just like people who do that every single day, all the time.
Yeah, especially since you tend to think of it in terms of like a few kids, but when there's, let's say, 20 different cases under each specific case manager, and asking them to not only do it day in and day out, but do it for multiple families per day, it's a juggling act for sure, but it's also very emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
Because you see things, you hear things, even when you're not necessarily being the target of hostility or anger, you are still like, I mean, obviously we all have empathy, or we should, but
gosh, I wish everybody had empathy.
Yeah, seeing or hearing some of these things that go on, it can be heartbreaking. It can be emotionally exhausting to go through. But as emotionally exhausting as it is for us, it's probably 100 times more for the kids involved.
Right. And for those who anybody who's lurking, anything like that, who doesn't know, as a child therapist on my end of things, like I see these kids, some of them who are going through stuff in the child and family world of legality, and like sometimes it's divorce, sometimes it's abuse, sometimes it's both, sometimes, you know, there's so much. And I mean, sometimes the kids are just wildly like just resilient, and they just like bounce, and they're, you know,
resilient's a good word,
and they can do a ton, which is always really kind of heartwarming and very like, oh, thank goodness, like, you know, I know that this kid is going to struggle, but at least like in this moment, with there's a basketball court like right near my office, so we go all the time. There's one kid that I specifically see every week, and he's just like, bust it out. I'm like, you got it. Like,
yeah, gotta build that rapport.
And we just walk past mom, who's sitting in the lobby every time. We're just like, we'll see you in like 50 minutes or so. But it's been really helpful for a lot of those things. And I imagine on your end of things, court is like near the final stages of most things.
It is and it isn't.
Okay.
In some ways, it's the beginning and the end. Okay. But then it's difficult to describe this, but in a way, court kind of dictates everything we do. Yeah. Like, if we want to reunify a child, if we want to expand the visitation of a parent, like if we want them to have unsupervised visitation as opposed to supervised visitation, if we want to terminate rights so that we can go for adoption, everything is in court. So typically from the court system, the way it'll work is we will have an initial arraignment at the start of every single case. Right. Well, technically we have a shelter hearing even before that, but we're not involved at that point because that's more than the investigators are making their case. Right. But for the case management side of things, the arraignment is kind of when it begins. And from there, I mean, they can take it to trial if they want. It's very rare that it actually goes to trial after an arraignment. And it's even rarer that a parent will win the trial. Most who do try to take it to trial are doing so out of a sense of rebellion. Like they're just trying to rage against the system, which I can't blame them for. Most attorneys will talk them out of it, though, before and say, hey, we really don't have a case. You have the right to do this if you want, but it's probably not going to go the way you want. Sure. But then once that gets sorted out and they're given what's called a case plan, which is basically originally it was considered like a glorified checklist for the things they have to do to get reunified.
Right.
But there's been a shift, at least in my county, where it's been less about the tasks that they're required to do and more about being able to display some sort of behavioral change as a result of those tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Like if a parent does like 20 weeks of DV counseling, but then goes up and beats up their significant other the very next day, then yes, they did the task, but no, there was no behavioral change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's a shift I did appreciate. But for that reason, though, about every 6 months or so,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the case, regardless if it's an adoption case, a reunification case, whatever, there will be judicial reviews. And those are usually in front of the magistrates that I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Their job is kind of to oversee the judicial reviews, which are basically just going over everything that's going on in the case. Like, what are the parents' current levels of compliance? What's the status of the children? Do they need any additional services in order to stabilize them? Because obviously, whatever is going on doesn't just go away, and the trauma that it inflicts upon the children also doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea is to try to at least stabilize them so that they can take those steps to kind of just reach that stability, I guess would be the best word for it.
Yeah.
Welcome, Raiders.
Hello, everybody. As I'm listening to you, besides like the ADHD jokes that run through my head of just like magistrate is a real thing. Surprisingly, yes. You sure it's not just like a Final Fantasy term? Because it kind of just sounds like a Final Fantasy term. It's got like magic in the title.
Surprisingly it is, although they are not quite as magical as the name may suggest, but they do have pretty frequent involvement because of overseeing those judicial reviews.
Yeah. All right. I guess. But yeah, so in your world, how do you fall kind of into this world? Because like originally I imagine maybe you were studying psychology.
Yeah,
and how does one fall into this world?
Well, originally I went to college. I actually did a dual degree where it wasn't a dual major because it was two specific, like, different degrees. One was a Bachelor of Science, one was a Bachelor of Arts, with one for psychology and one for criminology.
Ooh, okay.
And
loved my criminology class, by the way.
Yeah. They had actually a lot of overlaps with psychology, which is like,
totally.
It kind of dawned in my head when I was going through it. Well, if I'm doing all the same classes, I might as well get more credit for it.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was the same amount of money, so
paying either way, yeah.
Yep. So after getting out of undergrad, originally my plan was to work for maybe a year or two, then maybe look into going back for my master's. And sometimes things change, and they did change, in fact, because I ended up working 1 year turned into 2, 2 years turned into 3. I got promoted within the job and then became the court liaison within the job. Court liaison was more of a lateral move. Like, it was still a supervisor's pay, but it was a better situation for me, which is why I took it.
Totally.
But eventually, because I was making those movements within the system, and I guess you could consider it a weird form of Stockholm Syndrome, because even though the system is sometimes horrible, it still has those rewarding moments. So eventually it got to a point where I felt like I was really contributing something. Like, that my work it wasn't just, yes, it was thankless, but it was having real world consequences. Like, it's not changing the world, but it's changing the world for these families.
It's changing the world around you.
Yep.
No doubt. No, you're definitely like learning and being a part of, like, how do I, like, what a lot of people, like, because again, they kind of see your world as kind of the bad guys. And that's the unfortunate truth, but it also means that like they're seeing you and they go, all right, those are the bad guys, but what you're actually trying to do, trying to help.
Yep. And I will say there's usually kind of a negative connotation with how these cases go. Like most people think, oh, well, you're going to remove the kids and then you're going to like send them off to a foster home, send them out to adoption. But the vast majority of cases, like I'd say at least 80%, maybe more, end up reunifying with their parents. So ultimately, even though we do have to be those bad guys, eventually most of them will come around and realize, hey, like I'm getting my kids reunified with me and the situation is better than what it was before.
Right.
Another misconception, the majority of our cases aren't actually abuse cases, because I know most people, they'll think of like child services and they'll think, okay, well, parent is beating up their kid or they're doing worse to their kid. But a lot of the cases that come in, like more than the abuse cases, tend to be what they call neglect. And that's not just like locking kids in their room or not feeding them. Neglect is a very big umbrella in the system where it involves things like drug cases and domestic violence cases, where the child isn't directly the victim, but because they're exposed to all these things, it tends to make them a target of neglect.
Right, absolutely.
And,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
One other big misconception is poverty. Legally, now this kind of goes both ways. Legally, the law will never say that you can remove someone's kids for poverty. Like, that would be just wildly discriminatory.
Right.
However, the law does say you can remove kids for if their basic needs are unable to be met, and that's kind of where those lines get blurred.
Right.
Because a lot of these parents are trying to do their best, but when they are just struggling, I will say the system has gotten better about like not removing them and trying to connect them to services that can help them.
Right.
But it's always been one of those type of cases are always the ones that I hate the most, because they probably didn't need to be removed. But I don't control the system, unfortunately. So,
well, you'd be making a whole lot more, right?
Yeah.
If and you see this a lot in that world of, in the judicial system and stuff like that. I see when I was working in foster care, there were quite a few cases where there were like parents were just so not well off, or they had or they did have, drug and alcohol issues, where it's not like the kid was like in major danger necessarily, but like, mom was always strung out on the couch and like didn't feed him. There was food in the house, but like the kid's 7, like it's one of those.
Yeah.
And that in that scenario, I don't envy the investigator's job at all. Because to make that ultimate call would be awful. Like, I've had a judge turn to me and be like, "Which parent do you think the kid should go with?" And I'm like, "What the like? I see this kid an hour a week. What do you mean?"
Funny you mentioned that, because we've actually had therapists in our county that have refused to do that now, because it's like, I can talk to the courts about like the child's state of being, like like if they need anything additional, if there is a concern that, obviously there's HIPAA rules, but a concern that they do have to report, like they can mention that something was said to them that they did have to report, because we're all mandated reporters here.
Yep.
But they've sort of tried to stray away from giving a recommendation for permanency. Which I can't blame them, because that's definitely a good separation of roles, and that way they're not put in a conflict of interest, because you're trying to work with these kids through their trauma and not potentially traumatize them by telling them they have to prioritize one parent over the other.
Right, or you have to go with dad, or whatever it is.
Yep.
It's such a gray mixed area for a lot of people because it's so hard to make that ultimate call. And I know probably everyone, hopefully everyone is doing their absolute best for the interest of pretty much everybody involved.
For the most part, yes.
Right.
I would say I will say probably the one thing that's kind of been most hit or miss in the system is fathers. And it's not in the sense of, we all know there's always been some sort of systematic biases in favor of mothers over fathers when it comes to like divorce and child services. But what I have noticed is when it does come to fathers, you can definitely tell a marked difference between men who are fathers and men who are baby daddies.
100%.
And I will say personally, I think I've seen good strides in my own system where they've acknowledged like that when a father is, being the more protective parent, that they're not just unilaterally ruling in favor of the mother.
Right.
But you still do have a lot where if these parents don't necessarily want to be the father and they have to be dragged to court and DNA tested, that's normally when it can be a struggle. And oftentimes when it's not quite easy to reunify with that kind of parent.
Yeah. And it's and I said this, my current job is a little different, but in previous jobs where I was working either with the foster care kids or kids at like schools and stuff like that, and when you have to kind of deal with either absent dads or maybe dads who are struggling, with their own issues kind of going on. And the phrase that kept coming up was always just like, anybody can be a dad. Anybody could just, do that and be and have a child. But there's a definite difference between people who are, you can absolutely tell who is trying their best and maybe not doing great, but they're doing their absolute best.
Yep. And that's honestly the number one way to tell who's going to be successful in reunification. It's not necessarily those who are the most well off, but rather those who are just constantly trying to do their best. And your best looks different from person to person. So
yeah,
those who make that earnest effort, that's how you can tell they genuinely care for these children.
Yeah. And nobody really goes into, or at least I hope not, that nobody goes into this world of working with kids and families and being like, whatever happens. Like.
Yeah, if there's one thing I've learned over the years, it's anything dealing with children or families as a whole, rather, you have to be flexible.
Yes.
Things can change very, very quickly, even if things seem like they're going great. I've had things seem like they're going great up until the 11th hour, and then something that was previously unknown just comes to light, and everything absolutely blows up from there.
Right, and you're like, what do you mean? We did everything right. What do you mean? Like, it is a constantly very liquid, for lack of a better term, flexible job,
Yep.
And I imagine in your scenario where you are the one who kind of goes back and forth between like DCF and then being like, okay, this is what we figured out. Tell them that I'm going to go let the courts know about this. All right. And like, do you ever get like the middleman thing, like the middleman treatment?
I will say, as a consequence of being in my system for as long as I have, I do have like that rapport and that familiarity with the judges. Oh, okay. So that's probably the biggest thing that's helped me avoid that middlemaning.
Yeah.
because a lot of them know me from my time as a case manager. And, not to toot my own horn, but I was good at what I did. So
Toot away.
they know that when I say something in court that it's going to get done.
Right.
But generally, because I've been in the system so long too, I can kind of triage situations that come up in court in the moment
Mm-hmm.
because I just know the system from having worked it so long. So I can tell them, okay, well, this situation has come up, but we have this person who specializes in these issues and can fix it. Just loop them in, and then that situation is resolved without having to come back to court. Because the big reason why the court liaison system was kind of established is, generally speaking, when an issue comes up in court and it's not able to be resolved in court, then everybody has to come back on a different day. And that takes up a lot of time, not just for like the courts themselves, but for the families, the case managers, any other parties that have to be subpoenaed or just appear in general. So the idea was to try to get somebody in the courtroom who is not necessarily the case manager, not the direct person who is testifying for every case, because I'm not a case manager anymore. I don't have a specific case load that is under me.
Okay.
So I don't have the specific knowledge of any one case anymore. Instead, I have system knowledge. And because of that, we can try to prevent these cases from having to come back to court over and over again and just solve these things in the moment.
Right. And I imagine, like, with and this was something when I was living up in Oregon, when everything went to virtual, that was a nightmare for the court systems.
Yeah, admittedly, I think pretty much every judge and magistrate prefers people in person.
Yeah.
But I will say it has had another benefit, which is for those parents who are not well off and just getting transportation for somewhere is a challenge. That virtual appearance, like over Zoom or something, it really does help them, where they're not stressed out as much by having to really get to court. And so it's been a mixed bag. I do think overall the judges, if they had their way, they would still require everyone to be in person.
Mm-hmm.
But ever since 2020 and, pandemic, they started adopting more of a hybrid approach.
Yes. Yeah, I now have a very hybrid caseload of clients that I see. For a few reasons, like transportation is a really big one. That eliminated such a huge barrier for some kids even making it to treatment. It's like, oh well, mom and dad are working, so I can't and I'm 10, so I can't just hop on a bus. I don't want to stick a 10-year-old in an Uber, right?
That's definitely a safety concern in of itself, and that could get the kid removed for that too.
Right, exactly. So we're like, okay, but the kid knows how to work an iPad, and boom, just like that, give them the link, they're good to go.
Yeah, this is definitely a very tech-savvy era of kids.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they prefer it. Admittedly, certain kids are more prone to it than others. Like, I think some of these kids who are very distractible can sometimes have issues with the virtual, because they're able to have those talks on the iPad, but until that stops being fun, and then they look at that over there, and then,
working with the youngest kids was the most challenging for the virtual stuff. The teens, like the preteens and teens, like they can handle it pretty okay, It's like the I want to say like probably 8 and below, maybe 9 and below, that really just couldn't just sit there. And like for a couple of them, like there are like free like games that you can play together online, and that was like kind of worked. You got your legally distinct battleship, your legally distinct Uno, things like that. Because they're like, it's called 1-0. You're like, whatever.
Yeah, where they got to avoid that copyright.
Well, it allowed me to play a game with them so that they could just, all I need you to stay here with me and let's talk. Yeah, I mean that world has changed so much since then. Have you noticed, other than the hybrid model of the court systems and stuff like that, what do you feel like is kind of the biggest change in your world of working with families?
Well, I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I guess the blanket term for it was the focus on safety methodology, where we're no longer really looking at it in terms of, well, what have you done or not done on this checklist, but rather how it creates a real world behavioral effect. Because that was the thing for years and years where, yes, a parent would complete their case plan or whatever, but then 2 or 3 years later, they'd be back in the system again because they did the same thing over again.
Right.
So there's been a real push for observable, demonstrable behavioral change.
Yeah.
So, yes, you've done, let's say, this class, but can you verbalize how you're actually going to approach the situation different? Are you still living with the same person who you did the domestic violence with? Do you have a sponsor if you have substance abuse issues?
Sure.
Just having those safety monitors, I think, really helps, because asking a parent to do everything on their own, that can often set them up for failure. Because when you're asking them to check their own behavior, I mean, yes, some parents can do it. Some are, more insightful and reflective of their own behavior. But for most people, not just people within the system, it's a hard thing to do for anyone. So having those third parties, okay, we have grandma come over once a week to help mom out, or we have dad call his sponsor 3 times a week, and things like that. Just, it's really helped kind of reduce that recidivism that we would have, because the number one thing that I hated is having a case reopened. So whenever I was able to close the case, whether they would be adopted or reunified or whatever, it would be, I would always tell them, jokingly, that I hope I never see you again.
Yeah.
Because, yes, we built this rapport, but at the same time, I don't want to see them in the system again.
Totally.
I just hate when that happens.
Right. Yeah. That's the same joke I use. I'm like, dude, when the kids don't want to be in my office, it's kind of like, dude, I don't want you in here either. And I mean this because I want you to be okay enough that you can handle things on your own, that you don't need me anymore.
Yep.
So the second I'm able to say, get out of my office, lovingly, then great. That's what I want. It's tough because, yeah, you said a nice juicy word earlier, recidivism, and I was like, yeah, because there are definitely kids that we complete treatment, or they complete their treatment goals, and I'm like, all right, get out there, and it's a couple months later, and I'm like, we either missed something, or there's a systematic issue here.
Yeah.
Especially in the family world.
Yeah, and then, well, speaking of the kids, though, one thing I have noticed especially is a lot of the kids that come into the system, whether it be my side or yours, they tend to be the kids that get labeled, like the problem kids, the bad kids, because they are acting out as a result of the situation they're in. And yes, sometimes it can be frustrating, like, oh, Jimmy John, why aren't you going to school? But at the same time, when you look at it from their perspective, it's like these kids have had no control over anything. Like,
Zero.
parents were mistreating them, then they're ripped from their home and put in with a stranger, and they're sent to a new school. We basically told them, like, you have no control over the situation, and they have one thing in their life that they can control, and that's how they act. So
Right.
they act out as like a form of, I hesitate to use the word rebellion, but in their mind, it just gives them that freedom that they don't have anywhere else in their life.
Sometimes that acting out is so, you know, if it's a neglect case, sometimes it's the attention seeking, and
Right.
not that because attention seeking, everybody wants attention most of the time. We want, like, at least somebody to pay attention to me so that I don't feel like I'm alone, or I don't feel like I'm dealing with all this by myself. You know, even Twitch streamers, you know, like, we're,
Yeah.
you know, like, pay attention to me a little bit, you know. Just a
Yeah.
little bit. I don't need to be mega famous, but like, if you want to, you know, like, we're kind of,
Yeah, that's the dream, right?
right? Oh my gosh. But that world of they're acting out, and that has such a negative connotation to it, but their actions are becoming louder or more aggressive or more rebellious, you know, breaking rules, things like that. Yeah, it's a lot of the time it's like they're trying to tell you something. They're not doing it because F you. They're doing it because I'm trying to tell you something. Something's wrong here.
Yep. Mind you, it sometimes go a little overboard too.
No doubt.
Like, one of the biggest sayings in the system for us is that a child's circumstances can explain their behavior, but it doesn't excuse it.
No.
So, yes, they may be acting out, they may be breaking things, they may be hurting other people, and yes, we understand why they're doing it, but we still have to have them understand that there are still consequences to these things. They can't just go around doing anything they want, especially when it harms other people.
Absolutely.
Or themselves, mind you. Or themselves.
Oh, sure. Yeah. No, I with and older kids are able to kind of understand that more often, just developmentally. Although, I mean, I see, you know, 14, 15-year-olds who are definitely still in like the 9 or 10 range as far as developmental goes. But yeah, that kind of thing, you're like, it explains it doesn't excuse it. It shows why we're doing something, but it doesn't absolve what happened. It doesn't just all go away. It's like, oh, I was feeling really depressed, so I punched my dad in the face. It's like, okay, good reason. You're feeling a lot of emotions. Still punched your dad in the face, you know?
But yeah, and to be honest, this is something that I feel like doesn't just apply to kids.
Mm-mm.
I feel like heck, we see it on Twitch all the time. Like, oh, well, I did this and this, or I said this and this because of whatever reason. Well, okay, cool motive, but you still did or said those things.
Cool motive. Neat,
Yeah,
guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
It's just, it's tricky because we want to be understanding of why people are acting the way they are and what circumstances led them to that point. But the world doesn't stop, so still gotta we gotta divert that energy into different areas. So maybe a more constructive way to vent those frustrations.
Right. Something I tell people a lot is like, anger can be constructive. Like, a lot of the times people associate it with destructive behaviors, and like, rightfully so, because a lot of the times it is. I'm angry at this person. I want to fight them, you know? But metal music exists, right? Like, someone was really angry at their guitar and just started really strumming at it, went, hey, wait a minute, you know?
Yeah, and anger can bring change too.
Absolutely.
Like, when you're angry at a situation, angry at yourself, or even angry at another person, it doesn't necessarily have to turn to violence, but rather, well, then I'm just not going to associate with this person anymore, or I'm not going to put myself in that position that makes me angry. Obviously, not everyone can get necessarily to that point quickly, because when you're in those moments of extreme emotion, I mean, it's a tall ask for anyone to act rationally.
No doubt. No doubt. And it's so hard to look at the situation from that outside perspective, at least in the children's world, because developmentally, you're still right here. You know, you can't think much beyond the tip of your nose. And which is developmentally appropriate, by the way. Like, I'm not looking at 8-year-olds going like, why aren't you figuring this out? Like,
it's what we'd expect of them.
Right. You're like, why aren't you abstract thinking, you 6-year-old? You know, like it's like they barely know their ABCs, guy. It's tough because as like fully formed and fully developed adults, you know, we have to look at it and try and remember. This is something that I see in a lot of adults in general, the parents, people in the system who like forget that they're still kids.
Yeah, I think the older we get, like, I think this is just a general thing,
Mm-hmm.
the more detached we become from that, like, mindset of being a kid. Like,
Yeah.
yes, it's easy to look at a kid and see, oh, they're so cute, look at them being silly, but
Sure.
it's not just that. They have a different way of thinking.
Yeah.
They haven't reached all those developmental milestones that we have. So expecting them to kind of react to things in the same way we do it's asking a lot.
It's a huge ask.
Yeah.
And I think there are that what I run into every so often, you might have the similar experience, is these parents who basically like birth the kid and then they're like they're like in like 3rd or 4th grade and they're like, all right, well, this kid needs to start picking up the adult slack. And it's like, they're not going to.
Yeah, and I think a big one I've seen too is in sibling groups, the parentified older sibling.
Oh,
that
yeah.
one I've seen a lot, where they I don't want to say this is necessarily all families, but there's usually that kind of expectation that the older child will start helping to take care of the younger ones.
Mm-hmm.
Which, if they want to help out, that's fine. Like, that's a child, you know, doing what they do.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you can't expect them to be a parent. They're a child.
They're still a child.
Yeah, like, it's one thing if it's like, oh, can I hold my baby brother? Can I give my sister animal crackers or something? And it's like,
Yeah.
Sure, that's whatever. But just the parentified older sibling has just always been one of those things that it's just been one of those. I don't want to say it bothers me. It bothers me. I'm not saying it bothers me, but it bothers me.
No, you can say
But yeah, I get that a lot of the times when that happens, it's because they're in a situation where they need that assistance, and a lot of those families that we work with, like, we try to give them those resources, give them the education, so that the child doesn't have to be the substitute caregiver.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of those things, like, it just always sat weird with me, just the expectation of a child being a caregiver.
No doubt. And you run into that kind of, I definitely see it a lot more in young women, young girls. A lot of the time they get parentified even earlier sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And then you like look at it and you go like, well, okay, like I again, it's like I understand the reasoning. You're like, well, you know, they're gonna be a mom one day, and it's like, first of all, you don't know that. Number two,
Yeah.
like, not everyone is gonna need these skills. Especially if you're not gonna become a parent. Why? Like, I don't need parenting skills if I'm not gonna become a parent.
it's definitely a dated mindset for sure,
Hmm.
because I feel like it's very much that generation of, oh well, the end game for all girls is to become mothers, and that is a was a not a great mindset before, and
Hmm.
in the modern day, it's especially not a great mindset.
Right. And do you find like you see like those generational differences and almost trying to like tie the gap a little bit?
Kind of, I think we kind of touched on it earlier, but I think the biggest thing as far as the generational gap is the technology component.
Mhm.
Like, more and more of these kids are becoming more tech savvy in ways that I think their parents were never expected to.
Hmm.
And we all know that technology has absolutely exploded. Like, it's just advancing faster and faster. Like, when you think of like growing up in the 90s, where nobody had tablets or iPhones. We had the Game Boy, which was a brick that didn't even fit in your pockets until they
Nope.
made the Game Boy Pocket.
Right.
But I think that technology piece has definitely been kind of the disconnect, because I feel like, kind of leading back to the parentified child thing, where a lot more of these kids are getting better at like looking up these things, that so a parent may be like, oh hey, can you look up this for me, or can you search this for me? And it's like, it's fine like if you need a little help, but your child shouldn't be doing that for you.
Mm.
If you need help from them, then they know it's something they know about that can empower them. Like, yes,
Yeah.
they're helping the parent, and I think that's a great growth period, and it's showing the child that they can talk to the parent and teach them as well as learn from them. That's super
Absolutely.
empowering. Yeah, but it's just that generational difference of trying to learn to accept that help, accept that criticism. Because one thing I've definitely always noticed is parents, especially in the system, don't like to be criticized. I
Ever.
think a lot of them came from like the previous generation, where you don't really ever question your parent. They're always right. You do what they say or you get whooped. Obviously, the whoopings don't happen anymore because society has realized, hey, that's not a good thing to do to your kids. But
Yeah.
I feel like we definitely have a more open-minded, or at least open to experience,
Hmm.
generation of kids, where they want to try these new things. They want to learn these new things, and sometimes they'll see something where their parent is doing or saying something wrong. They want to correct them, but then the parent doesn't want to hear it. And then that has more than one effect, because that's telling the kid, well, they can't speak up about these things, that the parent doesn't want their help, doesn't want to hear from them. It's rough.
Yeah. Or doesn't want that uh that criticism, because like the worst thing as a parent you can be labeled as is a bad parent, you know?
Yep. Yep.
And
And,
you run I run into a lot of resistance when I'm talking to parents. Anytime I'm telling them, and I don't even say like, I really try to avoid the word like wrong or incorrect or things like that. I kind of say like, we have to kind of approach this in a different way, or we have to change our focus on, necessarily like, I don't know, like the totalitarianism of some of these parents versus like some parents like heard the word gentle parenting and then they don't do parenting. You know?
yeah. Yeah, there's a difference between gentle parenting and completely hands off.
Yeah, detached parenting. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm like, and I'm kind of for this kind of new wave of gentle parenting. It's very empowering for the kid. It's very like, it's even empowering for the adult, because like there's a whole lot less resistance that I've seen in the kids for these really gentle parents. But some of them are just like, well, so he decided to smash our coffee table because it was time for dinner, and so I had to take away the iPad for a few minutes, before I got set up to watch a movie during dinner because that's what he wanted. I'm like, okay. You know, like,
Yeah, that reminds me of a
Couple
quote
things.
from this. Reminds me of a quote from classic Simpsons. We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
yeah. Yeah, it's this new wave that, like I said, I like that world of empowering your child and like listening and like showing each other this kind of new, like, hey, I hear you, kiddo. I hear you. Let's work together. And that way there's not nearly as much conflict when you have like the I'm right, you're wrong, shut up kind of thing. I know quite a few of us probably experienced that growing up, you know? So coming into that of like, we have to change our focus.
Yeah, probably the rarest thing in the system.
Mm-hmm.
A parent apologizing to their kid.
Ooh, that's rare.
Yeah.
That's
And
rare.
it doesn't really happen a lot in the system because of the severity of things. I think you kind of mentioned it before with like no parent wants to be labeled a bad parent. So like when they come to court for the first time and they're trying to say why they should or shouldn't, you know, have their case, the number one thing I always hear is, but I'm a good parent. And I honestly, there are some of these families that I do think they are good parents, but even good parents sometimes need help, and being willing to accept that help can give them the opportunity to grow and can give them the opportunity to benefit their kids. But
Yeah.
because there's just that stigma involved with admitting that you don't know something or you don't have this or
Right.
things could be better, it just,
Or you fucking blew it. And
yeah,
there's not.
yeah, I was trying to be a little gentler, but yes, there are some who did. Yeah.
It's an 18 plus channel. You're okay. And it's
Okay, that's fair.
It's like confronting them in this kind of like, nobody's given this like the parenting 101 book. Nobody's like given this like perfect instruction manual because every kid is so unfathomably different, even within sibling groups. Like what Sally needs versus what Joey needs, right? Like those are, even though they're siblings, you can't treat them the same.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so well, it worked with Joey, and it's like, well, clearly it ain't working with Sally, so
Yeah, different people experiencing different things in different ways.
you know how you gotta change your playbook when you play a different team in sports? You know,
Exactly.
same concept. Or, you know, you want to paint something slightly different, you gotta change the colors, you know, whatever it is, whatever metaphor you want to use there.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you're dealing with anything that involves people, whether they be kids, adults, etc.,
Yeah.
you really can't have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Mm-mm.
And yet, ironically, our school system kind of is that.
I have my thoughts on that, but yes.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other can of worms, but but yeah,
the No Child Left Behind stuff. Ugh.
yeah. Overall, though, you gotta treat different kids differently. Well, I don't want to say it in that way, but different kids have different needs, and
Yeah.
some things that work for some kids will not work for other kids.
100%. I mean, you're looking at these kiddos who, some of them, you know, are growing up in these systems that you've probably seen of constant turmoil or very tumultuous kind of running around, and some of them has seen the DV or the drug use and things like that, and then like taking the kid out of that system and placing them in a stable system, and they're like, what do I do?
It's jarring.
Oh yeah.
And I think the other thing too is that no matter what the change is, whether it be a good change, a bad change, just any change, people have to adapt to it. and certain people are going to adapt differently. Like some people are you mentioned resilient earlier, and that's a great word where, yes, some kids are resilient where they can adapt very quickly to things. They
Yeah.
see, okay, this is a change. It's a good change, so I might as well just get used to it. Others, regardless of what their living situation was before, that was what they knew, that was what they were used to.
Mhm.
So when you suddenly change that, it's going to be a struggle for them. It could be like going from a drug home to like an upper class family that makes six figures and kid gets everything they wanted, but because it's not what they knew and not what they're used to, it'll still be difficult for them.
Yeah. Yeah, I had plenty of those foster care kids who would go into foster homes and like still like stash food or steal money because they were just like that's what they were so used to. And even though, yeah, like you said, everything's provided, you know?
Yeah.
They're like, there's no lock on the fridge, go for it, you know? Try not to spoil dinner, basically, right? Like that was
Yeah.
like the rule. And they're like, hey, if you need something, just let us know. And they just don't. It's this such a switch, not only like mentally but like physically where you are. You know, kids who are used to sleeping on the floor, but then they get a bed type of thing, and they're like, I don't know about all this, you know?
Yeah. Another one of those sayings, but the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So it's just when they're doing all these things for years and years and years, just because you remove them from the environment doesn't mean that everything is just going to suddenly change. They're going to still do those things because in their brain they have that mental checklist. Okay, I have to do this, this, and this today in order to make it through the day.
Yeah.
And I have noticed that sometimes, like a lot of these first-time foster parents sometimes struggle with that, where it's like, well, I'm providing such a nice environment for them. Why are they doing these things, or why aren't they doing these things? And it's like,
Oh yeah.
because you have to understand where these kids are coming from.
Right. Yeah, you run into that unfortunately often with like first timers.
Yep.
You could definitely tell. Like I remember that there was this one specific family I worked with, and they were like seasoned veterans, and they knew exactly like, okay, this kid's dealing with this. Okay, cool. So we'll set them up in this room, and it'll give them these things, and kind of, you know, like they like knew everything. It was like super cool to see. But again, that goes back to the like different kids needing different parenting styles, and what's going to set them up for the most success. You have to individualize it.
Yeah, and admittedly, I think that's probably been the thing that the system struggles with the most.
Yeah.
Because in a perfect world, you put every kid in their perfect placement, and everything is just perfect. However, in reality, when there is, let's say, 2,000 kids coming into the system, and there's X number of foster homes, group homes, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
and foster homes are only licensed to take a certain number of kids, then it's not always going to be feasible. Like, yes, the Smith family could be the perfect family for little Johnny, but if they are already over capacity with a waiver, they can't take another kid. So
Totally.
it's a struggle because you have to find the best possible placement at that specific moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I know that you were mentioning it earlier too about like, how do we find the like, I guess what's a good word for it? Like that systematic change. Like, if you were to think of like one or two of the big systematic changes off the top of your head, what do you think you would like go for?
I think right now a big thing has been trying to focus more on the front door, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like in the last year or so, DCF kind of brought the investigators in-house. Because
Okay.
it used to be they contracted out with the sheriff's department. But when you're dealing with the sheriff's department, they have very much go in, take the kids out, because that's how they respond to most crimes. Yeah. So they're not gonna do a whole different mindset. Like, they're gonna do what they do, and that's their department.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really fault them for doing what they're supposed to do, but because of that shift to trying to bring the investigators in-house to have them be Department of Children and Families employees instead, like, they'd still be certified investigators, but they're not the sheriff. So instead, we're trying to see, well, instead of removing those kids, what can we do to stabilize the situation while keeping them in the home? Mm-hmm. Because the more kids that we can prevent from coming into the system in the first place, the better, because one, you don't traumatize them. Because even if you're doing it with the best possible intentions, when you are removing a kid from their parents, it is going to traumatize them. That's it's a definite thing. It's going to happen.
Yep.
Even from bad situations, like, it's adding to their trauma.
Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the big systematic change.
It's definitely a work in progress. I'm not going to say it's definitely happening, because we still have a very high number of cases in the system.
Yes.
And to be fair, our county is also very large as is. Like, it's not a small county. Like, relative to the other counties around us, we're probably the biggest county at this part of the state.
Gotcha.
So, bigger county, more people, higher caseloads. That's gonna happen.
It's just,
but we're trying to do that. And so the big focus lately is front end and back end, because the other part of it is getting cases closed. Now, when we talk about closure, a lot of people think, well, when the kid goes back home with their parent, then that's the end. We're done. Case closed. Easy. But in fact, that's not the case. Because what they found is that when you put a kid back in the home with the parent and then immediately close, because there is that adjustment period, that's when they are most prone to that recidivism, because if something happens and there's no support, then the whole thing starts over again.
Right.
So it's actually statute in our state. I can't speak for any other states, mind you, but anytime a child are reunified with their parents, a case has to remain open for 6 months after that reunification to be able to make sure that it's stable before closing it out. And if there's any additional services that can be put into the home after the reunification, then that's the focus of that maintain and strengthen period.
Yeah.
And that's never going to change, because it's statute at this point.
I think it's not a great statute.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. But the other thing too is, since you can't, like, cut down on that time, they're trying to see what can we do to get there faster but safely. Because as I mentioned before, we're trying to cut down on the checklist mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not necessarily saying, okay, they've done everything on this checklist, so now let's reunify. It's being able to kind of visualize, well, how has that changed the condition of the home? How has that changed the behavior of the parents?
Mm-hmm.
And there's been that shift to trying to get kids home within that year, because they're trying to cut down on those cases that are open for 2 years, 3 years, etc. The one exception, though, that I think kind of handicaps itself when it comes to the whole 1 year rule is substance abuse cases. Because just in general, substance abuse is not something that is just fixed. It's a lifelong struggle. Addiction is a mental illness. It's not something that's gonna just go away. So realistically, substance cases are usually the ones that take more time, because yes, we would love to be able to reunify within a year, but at the same time, substance is a much more time-intensive journey to get stable, and they're not my favorite types of cases, to be honest, because a parent can be doing everything perfectly, but then relapse happens, because relapse is a part of recovery.
Yep.
But it's tricky because words are hard. On one hand, yes, you want to be sympathetic towards their struggles with substance. On the other hand, sometimes they do put themselves in those situations where they are going to relapse. So that's why those substance cases can be such a struggle, where yes, you want to have that sympathy, but at the same time, you also want to know that these parents are doing what they're supposed to in terms of making sure they're not putting themselves in a position where they're going to relapse and just start the whole thing over. Like, we try to frame it to them kind of in the perspective of like being a parent. Like, yes, like when you're stressed, your instinct was always to go out and have a drink or something.
Yeah.
But we're trying to get them to see, well, what other outlets can we do? Because, like, number one, when you're out drinking and the kid's left home alone, then that was the reason why we opened this case in the first place. So
Right. Yeah.
What can we do to have an alternative so that we don't get back to square one again? Trying to find those supports. Like, honestly, things like AA, NA have been great because they've been good with kind of managing that post-treatment phase of recovery.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier to be sober in recovery than it is just when you're out in, well, I don't want to say out in the open, but you're kind of out and not confined to like a facility and just living your life on a daily basis, having to make those choices yourself, as opposed to when you're in recovery, when a lot of those choices are made for you.
Right. And the more the maintenance stage rather than
right.
Just like having to either quit because, like you have a thing coming, or something along the lines of, a court order, or like inpatient stuff. Like, obviously that beginning stage is, that right away, there's that huge hill you got to go over right at the beginning. And then like, it's kind of an uphill climb from there. Then I used to work, in an outpatient, intensive outpatient, an outpatient place, and some of the things you ended up seeing were like a lot of that same pattern of just like huge hump at the beginning, right? Huge, really difficult, and there were quite a few people trying to get their kids back, and seeing that kind of like uphill climb. And granted, many of them were able to do it. Which was amazing and really inspiring. And AA, NA, HA, or any of the other ones that are a little more like nuanced or specialized, like huge in the maintenance stage. Like, I just kind of like, instead of having like necessarily like strict therapy on it or intensive outpatient or anything like that, it's like, we're actually we're maintaining, but having these kind of little reminders. And I don't know how often you work with NA or AA, but they like the misconception is a lot of the times it's like, it's super religious, it's all God, and it's like, well, some are. There's some groups that are very specifically like, yes. And a lot of the times they're held at a church because it's an open community area. But like that higher power that people talk about can be anything. One guy's higher power that I worked with was the bus. And I was like, go on. And he was like, okay. Well, before I had my like 14th DUI or whatever he had, he was just like, I could drive to the bar every single day and I could just drive straight to it, but there was no bus stop anywhere near that bar. And it just drove me right past it and I couldn't stop. He's like, that delivered me from the evil, as it were.
I mean, that logic tracks.
And I was just like, what a cool thing. He's like, I don't think there's any specific deity out there, but like that worked.
I mean, it works for him.
I was like, how cool, dude. Like,
yeah.
I love using that example for people who are just like, well, like, I'm just not a God person. I'm like, you could be a bus person.
Real bus.
Absolutely. And it's just one of those cool things that I feel like working with families and working with people in recovery, you go like, it's such a, at least a lot of the times at the beginning, it's a very delicate thing. It's a balance. They've been doing it forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how much like personal experience you had with it. Even my bio dad struggles with alcoholism. And like whatever he kind of deals with every day, I don't know, but like whatever he kind of deals with every day, like he's been doing it forever at this point.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, I don't deal with so much of the maintenance on a personal level. We usually can, especially when we need like collateral reports, because as I mentioned before, a lot of this ends up kind of going to the court to kind of check in on the reviews, but a lot of times we'll get those collateral reports from maybe like a sponsor from NA, but most of our involvement is kind of more centered around the recovery phase as opposed to the maintenance phase. I mean, we do still acknowledge the maintenance phase, but at that point we try not to micromanage them. Like we want them to be able to show us that they're able to kind of manage this with their system.
Right, working on their kind of like we're here as like the system to kind of help with programs, et cetera, but we can only do so much from our side. The recovery part is on you.
Yeah, and that's been a big thing for pretty much all cases, not just drug cases, where we try to help these families, but the one thing we try to avoid is for them to become dependent on the department, because as I mentioned, the end goal is going to be to close these cases and not be involved with these families anymore. Right. But if they're doing great specifically because of someone holding their hand or someone driving them everywhere or someone just, taking care of everything for them, then we're not really setting them up to succeed. We're enabling them to, so that because we haven't given them that opportunity to take that responsibility or giving them that opportunity to be the parent.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, hearing the way that you kind of talk about it not only shows what big brain you have, but it's also like there's some about like I can tell that you have like this kind of like, no, I legitimately do want like what's best for these families.
I mean, there have definitely been some cases where I have genuinely felt heartbreak that we've had to like terminate rights, because a lot of it is statute. Like if this goes on for X number of years and these conditions have not been met and we still have to reunify, it's still not safe to reunify,
right?
Then we can't just have a kid grow up in foster care.
Sure.
And I mean, I had a case probably within the last, I want to say it was the last year when I was carrying cases, that like I actually, after becoming a court liaison, got called back into that case to testify at that woman's trial, because that case had just continued and continued and continued, where yes, it was a substance case, so there was an expectation of relapse, but she kept, like, it just kept, this parent kept putting themselves in a position where they were going to, like, we would sit down with their treatment team, go over all their, like, their resources, their options, their support systems, kind of guide them to this, and then they just consistently make, I hate to say this, but the wrong choices.
Right.
And it was not a case that I wanted to ever see go TPR, well, TPR stand for termination of parental rights for
Right.
the layman's terms, but it had to at some point because this kid was 6 years old when he came into care, and then he 9 years old now, and it's like, well, when is this going to stop? And unfortunately, there was an end in sight, so it had to go that route. And I didn't like that it had to go that route, but sometimes you gotta do what's best for the child, even if it's not necessarily what you'd like to see happen.
Right. Yeah, it truly is. It can be such a heartbreaking and heart-wrenching and heartwarming thing when it comes to this kind of world of parenting and children and families all together, like working together with these families. Absolutely. Really, really, truly something you can't not put your whole heart and soul into. I say we take a quick little break. I kind of want to talk a little bit about like the world of Twitch and that kind of stuff, and how that kind of correlates with maybe either what you're doing or maybe not what you're doing at all. See if there's like a complete separation. So we'll be right back. I'll go ahead and we'll see you in just, I don't know, 5-ish or so minutes. Get the bathroom, fill up your water, do what you got to do.
All right.
We'll see you soon, everybody. Well, hello, hi, howdy. Welcome back, everybody. Apologies for any sort of technical difficulties. It's looking like it just doesn't want to go today, or at least go consistently. But if you're watching on YouTube, you won't even know. You won't even know. Welcome back, Travis. How you doing?
I am doing all right.
What's weird is like it's not interrupting like your video or anything like that on my end, so I'm like, what the heck?
Yeah, sometimes it just likes to act up. Maybe it's acting up for attention.
Maybe it is acting up for attention. It's like you didn't update me for a while. I'm like, I know. But anyway, switching gears a little bit, I had a couple of questions about like what got you into this kind of this Twitch world, this kind of content creation world, because it's large.
Well, I feel like my origin story on Twitch is somewhat relatable to a lot of the origin stories on Twitch.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly, I got into it during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now, a little bit of backstory is that I am asthmatic, so I was considered high risk for COVID. And as a result of that, I didn't really go out during the pandemic at all. Like, I was working from home.
Mm-hmm.
I was just home all the time, and it was getting kind of lonely. And at that point, a friend of mine who was already on Twitch was like, oh, hey, you should come meet my friends who were also Twitch streamers. And for years, I wasn't really into the whole streaming thing because I was like, well, if I want to, why would I want to watch somebody else like play a game or something when I could just play the game myself?
Totally.
So it took me a while to kind of catch on to the whole like streaming mentality. But eventually I did, and I started to like, the conversations that we're putting. It wasn't just watching the game, it was actually talking with people in the streams, whether it be the streamer themselves or other people in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of the missing piece for me, that social component that kind of made streaming more appealing as opposed to just thinking of it as just, I always thought of it like watching a Let's Play on YouTube or something.
Totally.
Yeah. So at first I was just not really super serious about it. Like, I would do a stream here or there,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess it was just kind of a casual thing. Like, there was no schedule. There was no, like, okay, I'm gonna play this continuous game. And mostly be like one-off thing, like Fall Guys or Hades, where you can just do a one and done.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but then it was right around the start of 2021 where I hit affiliate, and I hit affiliate on January 4th, so it's literally right after the new year.
Cool.
And it was at that point that I started to be like, okay, well, maybe I can, take it just more seriously. So I started having like a more consistent schedule. At first, it was just one day a week. I was just doing Mondays, and I was streaming Tales of Symphonia, which is a JRPG, so a longer game. So I picked that specifically, one, because I love that game, it's for me, and two, because like, it's kind of a way to commit myself to that. I was going to be doing this long game, meant I was going to continue to stream it.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day turned into two days turned into three. Originally, I was doing Monday, Thursday, Sunday, and then eventually it turned into Monday, Wednesday, Sunday. Thursday ended up moving to stay for various reasons.
Sure.
But yeah. And the biggest change was probably that I originally streamed without a cam. I was originally a no cam streamer.
Yeah.
So it was just a disembodied voice behind the game at that point.
Yeah.
But eventually I made it like a follower goal, I think it was at the time, where it's like, okay, if I reach X number of followers, then do a face reveal. And I specifically remember that when I did the face reveal stream, which was the first time with camera, the game I was playing, which was the first playthrough, was actually Journey.
Oh.
Because I'd said I'd never played Journey before, which I didn't, because I didn't grow up with the PlayStation or anything. But it was on Steam at the time, so it was like, okay. And it was one of those games that, a friend of mine suggested it because it's like, it's one of those games that has a very, not to spoil Journey, but like, it has a very unique reaction that it evokes from the person playing it. So if you're going to do like a game for the first time, and it's a short game, it's only like 2 hours, you might be Journey because people can actually see your reaction to it on your face.
Yes.
Originally, I was contemplating doing like a horror game, like I was originally going to do Little Nightmares. Ironically, I was going to do that up until the day of, but I ended up having technical difficulties with that game.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah.
Okay, so like many people, we also got started as Tank Bros back in the day, of course, during the pandemic, of just like, we can't go out. There's not, like, again, like we like watch it. We enjoyed guys like Markiplier and Game Grumps and that kind of style of just like mostly comedy oriented, but also like focusing on like a little bit of gameplay, if especially if it was a game you were good at. It quite literally started as a joke, because I don't know if you've ever seen any Tank Bros stuff. I think we might have met either like right at the end near it, or maybe after I became SuperTrav. Not sure. I'm trying to think. Probably after.
I think it was after, because the name sounds familiar, but I don't think I had like direct interactions at the time. I'm trying to think, but
that's fair.
Yeah.
it started as a joke because like I have curly hair and Cam has straight hair, and that's what Dan and Aaron have of the Game Grumps. We're just like, what if we just like, you know, eventually just accidentally they just, you know, happen to disappear one day and we just, you know, take over. And like that was kind of the joke, and then it was like, oh, this is actually pretty fun. This is pretty fun. And Tales of Symphonia, fantastic game choice, by the way.
Oh, I love that game so much. It's
Is
just
that
strange that
favorite Tales game? Is that it?
Yeah. The only thing I hate though is it seems like every time they re-release that game, it gets progressively worse. Like the quality of the re-releases has just not been it. Like GameCube is the only version of Tales of Symphonia that runs at 60 FPS. Like they re-released it on PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3, I think.
Yeah.
And they bumped it down to 30 FPS for that. Then they did a Steam port, but the Steam port was really janky at times and needed like a fan patch to properly work. And then most recently they did the remaster, but the remaster had a whole bunch of issues, and they're still patching some of them.
Which doesn't make any sense because it's a remaster, so it should take care of those things, you know?
You would think so. You would think so.
That
would be the common logic. That would definitely be the common logic.
So was it always JRPGs that like initially drew you to gaming in general, or were there other ones?
Oh, I actually had a pretty diverse palette all around.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned before how I didn't have a PlayStation growing up. Realistically, I was only having like one console per gaming generation. And I always went with Nintendo consoles because I loved the Nintendo IPs, like Pokemon, Mario, Zelda, like just give it all to me.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So yeah, like when I started streaming, Tales of Symphonia was the first, but then after that, the second game that was like on a consistent weekly schedule was actually Super Mario 64.
Okay.
Because that is probably one of the most nostalgic games for me. And the game that came after Super Mario 64 was probably the one that most changed my trajectory on Twitch. Because the game that I streamed after Super Mario 64 was Hollow Knight.
Hollow Knight is a fantastic game.
It is, and I love that game. It's probably my favorite indie overall. But
Really?
when I was I love Hollow Knight. Like one of my top 5 games of all time.
It is amazing. Truly.
Yep. But the clincher was when I did Hollow Knight, I did a Steel Soul playthrough. And for those who are not familiar with Hollow Knight, Steel Soul is basically permadeath, where if you die at any point in the game, then it's just game over. You have to restart the entire game.
Brutal.
Yes. But we did it and didn't die. So people said, yeah, thank you. So people would say to me, like, hey, if you're able to do this without dying, what about like a game like Dark Souls?
Sure.
And admittedly, I had never played Dark Souls prior, and even though I knew it had been on PC for a while, I never went for it, but not for the reason that most people would think.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I never played Dark Souls prior was because I hated the way gaming journalism treated it, where it's like, oh, any moderately difficult game has been released. This game is now going to be compared to Dark Souls. This game is the Dark Souls of platformers. This game is the Dark Souls of shooters. It's like, bro, not everything has to be Dark Souls. It really made me not want to play Dark Souls. So even then, I still didn't want to play Dark Souls. So I made it a community challenge. So it's like, okay, fine. If you contribute X amount of points, then I will do my first playthrough of Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Yep. And it was met. And originally, I did play my first playthrough of Dark Souls, and I didn't like it at first. I thought it was slow. I thought it was clunky. And I'm like, I don't see what all the hype is about.
Is this Dark Souls like 1?
Dark Souls 1. Well, it was the remaster of Dark Souls 1, but it's still
slow and clunky. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But like after the first stream of it, I'm like, okay, I'll give this 2 streams to see if I like it. But the first stream, I really didn't like it.
Sure.
Then the second stream came, And that was where I kind of started to pick up momentum.
Okay,
And
gotcha.
then things kind of changed because,
Yeah.
like, by the end of the game, I was first trying, like, every single boss. Like, I don't know how familiar you are with Dark Souls, but...
Not the first one.
Okay. Well, like, I was first trying all the DLC bosses and then the final boss of the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, okay, I'll do Dark Souls 2 after that because, you know, we blew through Dark Souls 1. And then Dark Souls 1 turned into Dark Souls 3, or Dark Souls 2 turned into Dark Souls 3.
Mm-hmm.
And then Dark Souls 3 turned into Sekiro, and then Sekiro turned into Elden Ring. And then years down the road, I got a PlayStation 5 because my community was so generously crowdfunded it for me.
Yes, I saw.
Which was,
remember?
Yeah, that was a big surprise because it took me a while to actually put it on Throne because I was like, I don't know if I deserve it. I don't know if I want people to put out like that much money and so on and so forth. But a couple people really were key in convincing me, like Alina Inverse, Rare Gangster, Jinray, like all of them really put like that effort into convincing me to do it. Like, okay, you know, you deserve this. Like, and I did, and then that led me to be able to play Bloodborne and Demon Souls, and
Blood.
now, now I've done all 3 Dark Souls at Soul Level 1. I did Elden Ring at Rune Level 1, beating every single boss hitless without using anything other than like the basic club. I did Dark Souls 2 at Soul Level 1 without rolling, and that was an ordeal.
Sounds awful.
So it was brutal. So it's like all because of that initial stream of Hollow Knight. It opened up a world of challenge runs and all these Dark Souls playthroughs. I still wouldn't say Dark Souls is necessarily my favorite like game series, but it's one that I've figured out I had a knack for. So
sure. I mean, if you have a knack for these like what are considered like the challenging style of games, then you go for it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe hot take, not hot take. It's kind of a lukewarm take, I guess. I think Bloodborne is better than any of the Souls games.
I think that's a very cold take. A lot of people put Bloodborne at the top of their list.
Like Bloodborne is so good, and it's such a different play style too. It like
I think
rewards
for me,
aggression. It's the best.
I think for me, I think Bloodborne is definitely top 3, but the top one for me has always been Sekiro.
Okay, fair enough.
But for me, it's because Sekiro has... Oh, it's totally worth it, but you cannot treat it like a Souls game.
Noted.
It's made by From Software, but it's not a Souls game.
Right.
Like, the fact that... I guess in a simple term, you could say it's more parry-centric, but because of that, and there's no stamina system,
right?
It lets you control the pace of the fights in a way that's not possible in any other Souls game, not even Bloodborne. Sure. Like, usually in those games, like, the bosses will attack you, you dodge it, you attack them back. It's a pretty standard gameplay loop. In Sekiro, because there's no stamina system, you can actually be the one to initiate all the exchanges, but they can parry you back. However, when they do parry you back, they will immediately try to counterattack after that. So it actually affords you the opportunity to initiate the combat if you can deflect or parry their counterattacks that come at you. It's kind of like a dance of sorts, where instead of just reacting to the boss, like if you watch these Sekiro speedruns, people are hyper aggressive. They are just pounding into these bosses because they know that they can just handle anything they can throw at them.
Right.
Obviously, you still have those bosses that'll do like the hyper armor where they don't flinch and that attack is just going to continue anyway. But as long as you know how to counter it, you can just really just pour on the gravy.
That's interesting. It's interesting. And it's cool because it's also, again, same developer, but like a very different style of game versus like, because all the Dark Souls are, they're that pretty standard. You could sit back, you can kind of parry a little bit if you want to, or you can kind of just dodge. Bloodborne, they were like, let's like give you no shield, which is fucking awesome. I guess it like rewards. It's like, get in there and fight, man.
Yep. Yeah, I like the rally system where if you lose health due to being hit, you have that moment where you can just keep attacking the enemy to get that health back instead of having to back off and heal.
Right.
So sometimes you can do that trade of damage. So that's fun. Like, that's what I really liked about Bloodborne.
Mm-hmm.
I had some camera issues with Bloodborne because I felt like sometimes the camera would kind of get stuck on the large bosses. But I loved the humanoid bosses. Like, loved Martyr Ligarius, loved Lady Maria, loved Orphan of Cause. Like, all those kind of bosses were the best ones for me because it was very much a back and forth, just brawl.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I will agree with you though about the 3 Dark Souls games being pretty much the same. I mean, they definitely like fine-tune the formula from 1 to going to 3. Like, Dark Souls 3 almost feels like the middle point between Bloodborne and Dark Souls, where it's a little faster than your standard Dark Souls, not quite Bloodborne, but it also like adopted Bloodborne's whole, you can use the charged heavy attacks rather than just a tapped heavy attack to be able to make those riskier, heavier punishes. But even when you look at Elden Ring, mechanically, it's very much Dark Souls 4.
That is fair.
I think mechanically Elden Ring is like 80%, maybe 85% Dark Souls 3 mechanics, but with like 10 to 15% Sekiro. Like, being able to crouch for like stealth and being able to jump are from Sekiro, but everything else is Dark Souls 3.
Right. Like, they get a little bit of platforming and, you know, that kind of thing. I can see that.
I will say I like actually having a dedicated jump as opposed to that little sprinting hop that you would do in all those games, which was not good for platforming.
No, I think they specifically were like, let's fuck with them a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
Because then if you miss even slightly, then you fall and you're just like, ugh. Like...
And then you meet the true hardest boss in Souls, Gravity.
Gravity, always. So if is it, so you said that they're not your like favorite, but they definitely opened a lot of doors and probably met a lot of people that way.
Yep.
Because they are such beloved games. Then if like, let's say like no restrictions, like what do you think, like if you were just like, I'm gonna play whatever I want to play all the time, do you think you go with some Tales games? Do you think you go...
I think I'd do, my favorite kind of game would definitely be JRPGs, because I love the stories, I love the characters. However, sometimes they're not always the best stream games, and some of the older ones, especially where you have to read everything, they can definitely be a lot. Like, I've definitely appreciated games that are fully voice acted where I don't necessarily have to read everything.
Sure.
That was a big benefit of Final Fantasy X when I did stream that last year. So honestly, like, my latest like game that I've absolutely adored, like latest game that I would say is a 10 out of 10 game, was Persona 3 Reload. And I played that game entirely off stream, mostly because, again, the length of it, and the problem what I have with streaming JRPGs too, especially first playthroughs, is because I love them so much, I don't want to wait until the next stream to be able to play them again.
Yes.
I want to be able to play it whenever I want.
Yeah. I totally
and
agree
for Persona
with that.
specifically, for Persona specifically, there's some weird Persona fans on Twitch. Like, just like, I modded for Alina Inverse when she was streaming Persona 5, and we've had some odd ducks come in and during those streams.
Yeah.
And I think because of all those factors, I'm content to keep certain JRPGs as kind of me time games where I can enjoy them in my own time. And I think one of the things that was told to me, I think it might have been Eyes on B who actually mentioned this, but not every game needs to be content. And that really hit home. Like, sometimes it's nice to have a game that's just a game where it can be an enjoyable experience for you, but you don't have to worry about any expectations of making it into content.
Yeah. I ran into that in our Tank Bros days where, like, every game that I thought of or wanted to play, I was just like, well, like, how would I work it on the channel? How would we work it on, like, would I play it? Would Cam play it? Or even like when I did SuperTrav, I was like, well, I want to play this game. Like, how do I, do I only play that kind of thing? And then I was like, no. You have to keep, if gaming is a passion, you have to keep some of it for yourself. Because then, like, if I'm sitting there, like I sit there when I'm playing games by myself, and like I'll make little jokes to myself here and there, but not nearly to the extent that I am when I'm live, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you're
yeah,
on, right?
Yeah, like, and I feel like for certain moments too, like people watch because they want to see a specific reaction.
Yeah.
And sometimes I've noticed some fans of certain games can be a little overzealous about it, where people will start like commenting in chat like, oh, this part is coming up, oh, I love this part, oh, get ready to cry. And it's like, well, that's taking away from my experience, because now you're giving me these preconceptions. There's not going to be a surprise factor of what's about to happen, because I know something's going to happen, something big, something exciting, something sad. And that's something I hate. I find that happens a lot with like the Nier games, because I don't know how familiar you are with Nier.
Nier Automata is easily in my top 5 of all time.
Yeah, that game has some gut punches, like both Automata and Replicant. But I've noticed a lot of people on Twitch, because they are so passionate about those games, when those moments are coming, they will like try to get the streamer hyped in a way. Like, I don't think they're doing it to try to spoil, but by doing that and trying to be like, oh man, this part, or oh man, get ready, it's like they're kind of taking away from that first playthrough experience.
I would agree with that. I think a lot of the times when I see it, and I see it more often, unfortunately, in like femme presenting streamers things. But you see, like, I don't think they're doing it out of like malice or spite. Like, I think they're just like, they're getting excited, so they want to type in the chat, I'm excited. And like, it's like, okay, we could talk about it right after it happens. Hold on to it for an extra second.
Yep. Those preconceptions are rough, because even if they mean it in the most sincere, nicest way possible, that, oh, I love this moment and I hope you love it too, it definitely can take away when you expect it, or when you think something's coming.
Right, like watch me dissociate during the cutscene, because now I'm like thinking too hard about it.
Well, like, I know you're going through Final Fantasy 16, and I've been going through that as well. And that's a game that has a lot of like very dark moments, and it's one of those things that, well, if you knew this moment was coming, then that's going to take away the punch of it. Right.
Also, I totally related super hard on your, I think it was a tweet like either today or yesterday, and you were like, I'm tired of doing side quests on stream, and I'm like, yeah, it's because there's like a billion.
Yeah, and like, I reached a point where like I feel like I'm getting close to the end of the game, and then probably more side quests than I've ever seen popped up, and it's like, the game is tough. Like, the PlayStation home screen is saying it's 97% completion, and then like 10 side quests pop up, and I'm like, I would really rather just do that 3% than do 10 side quests. We'll hit the whole stream anyway, because everybody in that game talks very slow.
Oh my god, I was literally thinking that in the last stream. I was like, why does everybody like take these pauses between sentence?
Yeah.
It's like,
don't get me wrong, I think the voice acting in that game is superb.
It is.
Yeah, it's just those pauses can really just make everything feel very drawn out.
Right, and then like after somebody finishes their thought, and it takes a second, switches over to Clive, who like grunts, and then and it holds on him for an extra second, and I'm like, oh my god, this conversation should have been over 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, some of those conversations I also think are a little wordier than they should be, where maybe you can cut out half the dialogue and still have the effect, but in a more succinct way.
Like, listen, I know the game doesn't know I'm streaming it, but like, let's pick it up a little bit. Yeah. Oh, totally, man. And I was just thinking that in the last time. Yeah, I've been doing all the side quests off stream, because because of the dialogue, they take a long time, but I want to make sure that I'm like absorbing all the little extra things, you know?
Yeah, I do think the side quests have merit. Like, I do think they have little nice tidbits of world building.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe not all of them are super interesting. Like, I don't really need to know what this random NPC's life mission was but it's like some of them do give good insight, like to the lore, to the world, and some of them give you good rewards, like, hey, and now I can carry more potions.
Yeah, and it's not even like this is not a spoiler for anybody who wants to play it. Like, there's a specific side quest where the guy's like, I want to make the perfect bread, and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
Like, again, world building, getting to know the people of the area. I get it. I don't remember that guy's name. Like, I don't remember anything about that.
Yeah, it's not engaging.
But they make you run around, and you have to run slow in the towns. And so, like...
That's been one of my complaints, too. The fact that, like, when you're in the field, you can actually do, like, a fast run.
Yeah.
But in town, you just kind of jog along at that casual pace.
Light pace.
Yeah, it's... I wish I could... well, number one, I wish I could toggle that run. Like, when you're riding the chocobo, you hold down the right trigger to just go fast. Why can't that be a thing when you're running? I mean, I get it because they want you to... Well, like, when you're switching to combat, that you can switch to your whatever. But you can at least have that in town when you're, not having combat.
Yeah, I'm not walking by every NPC and talking to them. Yeah. Like, just let me hit the thing, let me grab a potion or two, and
I like 16. I like 16, but I don't think it would crack my top 5 Final Fantasies.
That's a tough one. It plays more like a Rise.
Yeah, my thing about Final Fantasy 16 is I think the combat is fun, but I also think it gets repetitive after a while.
Absolutely.
Because I feel like it's kind of missing something in, like, when you think of a Final Fantasy game, you think of having, like, these different abilities, but they have elements attached to them. And enemies will either have weaknesses or resistances to these elements, so that you have to use different abilities in different situations.
Yeah.
And then there's 16, where you have elemental abilities that you get of different elements, except none of the enemies have any elemental weaknesses or resistances, so it's basically just... I never felt like I had to change my strategy. Like, I felt like the first enemy in the game and the last enemy I fought them in the exact same way. Mind you, I have more abilities, and sometimes I can be like, okay, this ability does more damage, so I'll use this instead.
Sure.
But I don't ever feel like I have to mix up my strategy for different battles, because it's just a one-size-fits-all approach to combat.
It really is, and like you can't miss. You know what I mean? Like you can't really miss when you pick a specific ability. You're just like it's kind of just like whatever fits your play style. If you like the lightning guy, use the lightning guy. If you like the fire guy, use the fire guy. If you like the
just pick one. I feel like it was a good, like, very experimental game. Like, they were trying a different approach to combat. However, it also feels a little bit like they didn't fully realize what they could have done, just based on, like, staples of the Final Fantasy series.
Sure.
Like, elemental weaknesses are not new to the series. It's been around since the NES days.
Right. But what
things like
the guy was like the only thing that makes like a Final Fantasy game is like crystals and like one other thing, chocobos.
And yet they didn't have the chocobo music when you're riding a chocobo.
Nope. But that would take away from how grim everything is. You know what I mean?
I have some thoughts about that, and I don't want to get too much into Final Fantasy 16 spoilers, because it's not why people are here. But no. I feel like what they're trying to do, like, they wanted to make a dark Final Fantasy game, but there's been a lot of other dark Final Fantasy games. Like, we look at like Final Fantasy 7, that's a very dark game. Final Fantasy 10 has extremely dark themes
and daddy issues.
but they also had like those moments of levity mixed in so that like it broke up those serious moments so that when they did occur, they had more punch. But when it's just serious moment after serious moment after serious moment after serious moment, then it's like, okay, I'm kind of getting a little numb to it.
a little bit. I'm still enjoying it, still going
Oh yeah,
through
it's
it.
good. It's good. I'm engaged. It's not like I'm like bored because I've had games before where I dropped the game because I wasn't enjoying it. But
yeah.
Oh yeah, one of my big things I learned from streaming is if you are not enjoying a game,
Neither is your
then
audience.
yeah, exactly. So
100%.
if I'm not enjoying a game, I've dropped them like a ton of bricks.
Yeah. A game for me that I dropped I dropped off stream, I should say, because I kept playing it off stream because I was like it's just such a slow pace game was Xenoblade Chronicles, the first one.
I love Xenoblade Chronicles, but I also don't think it's the best game to stream.
Yeah,
but I also played all three of the Xenoblade games off stream, so it's like I don't think I would ever stream them. But again, that's one of those things with how long they are too. Like I don't want to wait to play them.
They're 100+ hour, 200+. Yep. They're huge. I'm in the middle of 3 right now. Middle.
Oh, I love 3.
And I don't know.
You're playing 3.
I'm playing. I'm doing it.
Yeah. But yeah, I had one of those games myself where it's a game that's really loved, like really popular game. I was enjoying it, but I wasn't enjoying streaming it. It was actually God of War 2018.
Really?
Yeah, there were 2 reasons.
Tell me.
One was just because of Twitch, because there were people who would be like, oh, are you doing a challenge run? Because you should have way more health than you currently have right now because of picking up all the things. It's like, well, don't tell me that, because that's basically, it's like backseating, but it's like inadvertent backseating.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
And I'm always like very, very anti-backseating. Like I just want to do my own thing. Like I want to be able to figure out these things for myself. But since God of War has such a passionate community, it's kind of like what we talked about earlier, where they'll be like giving those kind of little, oh, well, because I'm so passionate about this game, I want to comment on this thing or this thing.
Right. I love this boss or something,
Yeah.
You're like, okay.
The other thing, and this is specifically as it relates to streaming, they talk a lot. Like, normally I like to mix in, like, chatting with while I'm playing the game. It's the streamer thing. That's why I'm streaming the game, not just to play it. Like I also want to chat with people about the game. But like when I'm in combat, I'm mostly focusing on the combat because it is demanding combat, especially at the higher difficulties. So most of the time when I want to chat would be when I'm like going from point A to point B, because it's like we're not really engaged with anything. We're just traveling.
Right.
But in God of War, we'll just be like rowing in our boat, just going to the next area, and then suddenly they'll start talking about things. And it's not just like random chatter. It's not just banter. Instead, it's like, oh, hey, would you like to know about this lore that's significant to the world we're in? And it's like, well, yes, I'd love to hear this, but then I feel like I need to stop what I'm doing because I don't want to chat over it. And at the same time, I want to listen to it, but then I feel like I'm just sitting there in silence for most of the game.
Yeah, that's fair. That is totally fair.
So I still haven't quite gone back to it because there ain't no hell like game backlog hell.
For real.
But I do want to go through God of War 2018, maybe Ragnarok 2 now that I have the PS5. But I think they are going to be exclusively off stream if I do.
I kept Ragnarok off stream, so.
Yeah. Well, I also know that Twitch has a very bad culture when it comes to spoilers, especially for new, like, big releases. So I feel like a lot of people would, like, do Ragnarok off stream because they didn't want people coming in to spoiled.
That's fair. Yeah. The reason was, it was just like, I realized that all the games that I was playing were games that I would like holding on to. And I was like, I gotta keep something for myself here.
Yeah.
I gotta do something for me. Because there were times, this is a little anecdote, but it was very like, there's a point where I wasn't getting burnt out, but I was feeling like gaming was becoming more like work, you know?
Yeah, I can see that. Where it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. Not every game has to be content. Where you still want to have games that you can just enjoy. You don't have to have any expectations placed upon them with like streaming or YouTube or anything.
Yeah. Yeah. So and changing that kind of thinking a little bit around like, no, I'm keeping Ragnarok for me.
Mm-hmm.
And like,
And hey,
I don't need someone telling me how to do it. I don't need to make jokes over it the whole time. Plus Ragnarok does plenty of its own little like Marvel-esque quips and stuff the whole time anyway.
oh yeah.
I don't know if you've seen any like clips or anything, but they love those in Ragnarok.
Oh yeah. And like, I feel like that's part of what I was getting at too. Like, they have so much dialogue in that game. Like, some of it is just funny, but then it's like, it's hard to balance that commentary with the game's commentary. So
Yeah.
it's a tough balance. So I don't blame you for keeping Ragnarok for yourself.
Yeah, and there's other games now that I've learned to keep to myself because of those communities that do exist on Twitch. We played as Tank Bros. We did one Smash Bros. Stream, which was an awful idea because
The Smash Bros. Community on Twitch is something else.
and here's the thing, I literally used to play it like competitively, so like I'm not to like too much, but I'm pretty fucking good at it. Like, I'm way out of the competitive scene at this point, so like things have definitely changed. But I'm like, no, I'm pretty good at this, and we were like, we're gonna go online and maybe we'll mess around a little bit, maybe we'll like really try sometimes. We were just having fun, and people would come in and be like, oh, you shouldn't have never side beat there, that was this horrible mistake, like you would have gotten taken advantage. And I was like, did you notice that like we're talking about dicks this whole time? Like, are you really like
Yeah.
this is not important right now, man. Like,
I think some people take it way more seriously than they need to.
and that's why, like, I think, and I've said this with multiple other streamers, and multiple other streamers agree, it's just like, once this streaming itself, whatever this is, becomes no longer fun, I'm done.
Yeah, I was the same way. Like, I've talked about this with a couple people, but like, spoilers, I've considered dropping streaming before, but I didn't. And when trying to figure out when would be the time, the number one thing that was recommended to me is when you stop like getting any enjoyment from it.
Yeah.
As long as you have something to gain from it, then if you want to keep streaming, do it. But if the things that it takes from you is more than the things that it gives from you, then it's probably just not worth it.
Totally. And how exhausting does that become to be like, I'm really working hard here to like try and make this fun, and it's like it's literally a game. I'm like, once it becomes not fun, that's it.
Yeah. Fortunately, I don't think. Well, hopefully, neither of us has reached that point yet. I can't speak for you, but yeah, I do think occasionally it gets closer to that point.
Sure.
But as long as we can be like, okay, well, this was because of the game I was playing and the Twitch community surrounding it, then we can be like, okay, well, we learned. Now we're not going to stream that game.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've ran into, I haven't gotten to the point of like, I'm done, I'm quitting. But I've definitely been like, I need to like really evaluate where I'm at with this, because like I've you know, maybe you try a new thing and you're really going for it and it doesn't work out, and you're like it can be really defeating. I'm really glad that like specifically TravTalks has been like this like kind of thing that people loved, and like I don't know if you do this. I had considered just stopping it forever because I got big timed by like 3 people in a row.
Huh.
I got told by somebody who wasn't like ungodly big or anything like that. It wasn't ninja, you know, like but they were
less
like
said about ninja the better.
Whoa.
Yeah. I don't like to go into the whole ninja discussion personally,
It's
but
fair. I just like making fun of him.
Yeah, I know he's the example. I'm not a ninja fan. Let's just put it that way.
No, I have perpetuated this rumor that he's a cannibal.
Me like Shia LaBeouf.
Legitimately eats people. What was it? Oh, this person not that much bigger than say like kind of the, I don't know, the iZombie rare gangster kind of range.
So like 100-ish average.
Somewhere in there, right? And yeah. Who I've had both of them on this show before.
Okay.
Both rare gangster and iZombie, and they were like, I checked your Twitch tracker and you're not big enough for me. I see your look right now.
That's
that was kind of my look. Wow. I was like, huh.
Okay, well.
I had another person. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's like, I wonder how that person's view is with their head stuck so far up their butt.
I don't know. Like, it's not like they didn't collab. They had like other collabs and stuff with people, but I guess it was just a numbers game to them. Yeah. Another person, I got sent rates.
Rates, like they expected you to pay them
per hour. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, per hour, and they had to like sign off on everything. So like I was like, in every episode that I've ever done of TravTalks, I usually just upload the VOD over to YouTube. All set, good to go. You know, no editing or anything like that. Usually just like small little things. And they were just like, well, I have to sign off on that. And here's my rates. And I'm like, that's more than like some people get paid for real jobs.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I get people want to monetize like their content, but at the same time, that's not the way you go about doing it.
Right.
That's the way to isolate yourself.
I'm not big. Like, I'm not big enough for that.
Yeah.
I'm not big enough for that. I still have a regular job. What are you talking about? You know?
Yeah.
That's the money that I'd be paying you is from my real job to do whatever this is.
To be honest, though, I think for me personally, the fact that, you know, having that real job, like, I don't want to say like full-time content creation isn't a real job, but like having a job outside of Twitch is what helps keep Twitch fun for me, because I feel like if this was my job, I would enjoy it less, because the focus would always be, okay, I got to make money. I got to earn a living wage. Like,
I got to hustle. Yeah.
It's not doing it because I love doing it. It's doing it because I have to. Right.
Because if you don't make content, you disappear and nobody pays for nothing.
Yeah. And don't get me wrong. Like, I know there are some people on this platform who are able to make full-time streaming work for them.
Totally.
But Twitch makes it as difficult as possible, because like them taking half your paycheck as is a big blow. Like, kudos to them for doing the whole plus program thing, but even so, I still think the split should be a little more for the content creator. Like, I get it, Twitch is the platform. Without the platform, the content creators can't do anything, but at the same time, without the content creators, the platform is just not making any money.
Right.
But that's a whole other story altogether. But
yeah, and how do you balance that from like a corporate perspective, owned by the bigger company at large, whose like only concern is making money? So
yep. But yeah, like Not only that, but you're also dependent on the generosity of others. It's not like you're being paid a consistent paycheck. You are contingent on people giving you that money, and sometimes you'll have people who are super generous and they'll give you like 100 subs, but then the next month you get maybe 10, and it's like you really can't plan around that. And I think it not having that consistency would probably cause me more stress.
Absolutely.
So I don't think I'd ever want to be a full-time content creator. I mean, realistically, most of the people who can be like a full-time content creator with a living wage either have something else on the side that's making them money, they have sponsorships, or they just have insanely generous donors off of Twitch, like doing things through like PayPal or from Ko-fi, which does take a cut, but a smaller cut. But I don't think you can't really subsist on just gift subs and subs alone. Just subs and bits don't really pay a living wage in any state.
Yeah, it's extremely hard to, and I'm obviously like, because I compared it to what did I say the other? I compared it to busking. You're kind of like just going out, making the content, making the music, whatever it is, and you put your hat out there, and hopefully some people do it, but they don't have to. Like, it's not like it's not like you're gonna like. We make the joke about like, you know, if I don't get a hype train in the next 5 minutes, I'm done. You know, like, but like,
Yeah.
but that's kind of similar to what it is. It's like, I put the hat out there, hopefully someone wants to throw something in there, but if not, I can't fault them. And I had somebody, it was a couple months ago, but they were like, listen, man, I had an unexpected expense come up and I just can't like resub. And I'm like, don't ever forsake like living things for me making goofs online.
IRL before URL.
Absolutely. Right? Like, don't sweat me for the 250, bro. Like,
yeah. Like, I wish I could sub to everybody, but it's just not possible. And even then, that's like, okay, well, here's $5, so that doesn't exactly buy them their next meal, especially with the cost of everything going up.
Right. And even then, like, if it's not something that's feasible, because like $20 by itself, that's 4 streamers that you're subbing to monthly, right? Like, that adds up.
Yep. It does. And it's like, you'd love to be able to do it for everyone, but it's just not feasible, especially with the networking involved. Like, we start to know more and more people.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice if we could, but I don't know. It's tricky. It's a tricky balance.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you, like you said, you nailed it when somebody was, it's luck for some people, right?
Yep. And I never want to say that it's entirely luck, but luck is always a factor. Like, you can't say that, like, I feel like it comes on, you see this on like streamer Twitter all the time, where people will just be at each other's throats arguing, where it's like, oh, luck has nothing to do with it versus luck has everything to do with it. And then like it'll change to, oh, well, attractiveness has nothing to do with it versus attractiveness has everything to do with it. But in every single one of these cases, it's like it's always somewhere in the middle. Yes, luck plays a role. Yes, like attractiveness does play a role. I feel like this conversation comes up and nobody wants to face the truth.
You and I had that conversation, actually.
Yeah, like they've documented this. This is like not new to streaming. Like, we see this in every entertainment media. Like, people are just naturally drawn to people they find attractive. It's not saying that doesn't make you shallow. It's not a sin. It's the way your biological animal brain is programmed to work.
Right.
Like, you see someone you find attractive, man, woman, whatever. Like, it's definitely not like this exclusively, like female or femme presenting streamer thing that like all the angry like man child on Twitter will try to argue it is.
Yeah.
But it definitely it is a factor that plays into it, but it's just one factor of many.
Absolutely. Yeah. Nothing about it is like black and white.
Yep.
At all.
And there's so many factors, like how hard the person works and like how much effort they put into their stream, what they're streaming, like the day they're streaming. Like you could be streaming, let's say Elden Ring, on the same day that Miss Micah decides, oh, I'm going to check the category and raid somebody random in it. So yes, in that case, it's like you're in the right moment, right time, you got lucky, and then suddenly you get a 4,000 person raid. And it's like, yeah. And it's one of those things, like, yeah, just you can't predict it.
You have zero predictions there. Like it just.
Yep.
There was I was playing Star Wars, the not the newest one, but the one right before that, Fallen Order.
Yeah, Fallen Order. Yeah, that was one.
And it was a day that I was like, I had the day off work because a pipe in our building burst, so they were like, you can't be here, go home. And it's pretty distracting to have like boiling water coming down while you're trying to do some counseling. But they were like, all right, just go home, it's fine, whatever. And I was like, screw it, I'll just go live. And that day, pure luck, happened to get like I think it was like 1,400 people raided into the channel. And I'm like, it's like Wednesday at like 2:30 in the afternoon. Like,
yeah, sometimes you're just in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and that's not a factor you can control. The factors you can control are the people that are the things that I feel like people argue most about. Where they're like, well, nobody comes to my stream. And it's like, because you're playing in a dark room for 9 hours with no mic. And like, I don't, if you put no effort in, what do you expect to come out of it?
Yep. It's just such a number of things. Like, yes, you got to put in the effort. Yes, you got to keep at it. And like, dirt's so bad. Words are hard. Certain things benefit certain people differently. Like you were mentioning, you did a random stream on a day you wouldn't normally.
Right.
And that helped. But then for some people, it's like they need that consistency because their usual audience is counting on them to be on at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just different for everyone. And that's, I think, the thing that's hardest about Twitch. And it sucks to hear because it's like when people are looking for like advice when they're starting out streaming, and a lot of it is, well, it depends because different things work for different people, and you like two streamers could do the exact same thing at the exact same time and still have completely different outcomes.
They could both be named Travis.
Yeah.
What are the odds of that?
Well, apparently better than we thought.
Higher than we thought. I'm not from Texas though. Are you from Texas? Like,
nope.
And because that's like one of the most common names down there, but
didn't know that.
There's a Travis County.
No.
There's a Lake Travis. There's all sorts of stuff down there.
Part of me would say that I don't think I'd ever want to go to Texas, but a lot of my closest friends also live in Texas, so I'd go there to visit them, but I don't think I'd ever, live in Texas.
That's fair. That's fair. Got quite a few East Coast friends. I'm like, I'll never live here, but I will come hang out with you.
Oh. Well, I mean, based on us scheduling this, I'm an East Coaster. Eastern time zone.
It's true. It's true. We have a little bit of time left. What do you say? Open it up to any sort of Q&A from the peeps.
Sure. I am all for it.
Let's make it happen. So anybody who's out in the chat, first off, thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of this today. And if anybody has any sort of questions, whether they're related to what we've been talking about or not related to what we've been talking about, can kind of be anything out of left field. It could be as simple as, what's your favorite color? It could be as complicated as, what do you think the genome presence is in like Magikarp to Gyarados? Like what's like how does that small orange thing that is based on like, you know, Japanese folklore and stuff like that. I get that part, but like where how did it do that? If we all believe in evolution. Or, Mr. Travis, do you have any questions?
Now that is a question. Although, fun story, I actually, at one point when people ask, like, what Pokemon do you, like, most relate to, I used to relate to Magikarp. Because I had a point in my life when I felt weak and useless, but then with the knowledge that eventually I would become something better, that I would be able to grow and become a better version of myself.
I love that.
Yep.
I feel bad that you felt so useless and stuff like that, but it's a relatable feeling. But I love that you have her like, I will grow and I will become extremely powerful.
Sometimes you just got to believe that better things are to come, because when things, like, at the moment suck, I mean, yes, it's very easy to get, like, lost in those feelings of, yo, shit, everything sucks, everything's terrible. But at the same time, you gotta believe that, you know, there's something worth pushing through those sucky times for. That there's gotta be a light at the end of the tunnel. It may not be immediate, it may be something you have to work towards for quite a while, but you still gotta believe that there's a reason to keep pushing forward.
You're there.
Otherwise life just sucks. So you just gotta believe.
Yeah, there's definitely something that comes from that kind of power of belief. No doubt at all. Let's go. My question would be, what's your favorite Gen 3 specifically Pokemon?
Ooh, that's a tough one, because there are quite a few in Gen 3 that I love. That'd be a toss-up.
Okay.
Let's say, obviously I have an attachment to Sceptile because I started with Trico.
Okay.
I think my favorite, like, non-starter, non-legendary, non-anything, just like a random Pokemon you find, would be Aggron, because the idea of a steel-plated dinosaur is metal as fuck, no pun intended.
No doubt.
But, and then as far as legendaries are concerned, I have an undying love for Groudon, because I thought it was just cool as hell. Like, I grew up on, like, the old Godzilla movies and the old kaiju movies, so this big ancient dinosaur with all these, like, runic marks on its body, that was just cool.
It was,
especially because at the time, there wasn't really anything like that before. You had, like, your birds, your dogs, your crimes against humanity. But then, like, these ancient beings. But I always kind of liked Groudon more than Kyogre, because big dinosaur is cooler than big fish.
Big whale fish thing. Yeah. I they also have, like, my favorite, like, legendary battle story, which is basically them just being like, fuck you, I hate water. It's like, well, fuck you, I hate ground. Like,
yep. And then Rayquaza comes down and says, hey, you stupid kid, shut up and get off my lawn.
Basically, right? And he's just like, sky's the best anyway. That's one of my favorites.
Admittedly, I think Gen 3 was kind of when my, like, Pokemon hype was kind of dying down a little bit.
Yeah, fair.
Because I love Gen 1, love Gen 2, because it came out with, like, that Pokemania moment when it just absolutely took over the world, and nothing would ever come close to that. Like, when they talk about games being popular now, it's like, oh, well, everyone on Twitch is playing it or something, or you see everyone buying this game at GameStop. That does not come remotely close. Like, everything was Pokemon. Like, you walk through a store and then there'd be Pokemon clothes, there'd be Pokemon cereal, there'd be Pokemon backpacks, Pokemon lunchbox, Pokemon everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so people would be playing Pokemon as they're watching the Pokemon show, which is airing for the first time, and it's just, like, absolutely everything. It was the most marketable thing, and it's, like, just insane the degree. Like, there were Pokemon Pop-Tarts, then you don't really ever see Pop-Tarts do, like, sponsored anything nowadays.
Not now. There was a while there where they were like tying in, like I remember a Spider-Man Pop-Tart and
Yeah, they definitely like have shied away from it in recent years, but I think like the Pokemon ones were like they were the big ones because I think that was kind of like when Pop Tarts really started doing that. Now that I think about it, because it took over. Like
it was huge.
Nothing else will ever compare with like just the absolute craze involved in it. But yeah, like I love Gen 1, love Gen 2 even more because it fixed all my problems I had with Gen 1. Like, don't get me wrong, Gen 1 Pokemon games were great, but they were held together by duct tape and a prayer. Like, even compared to other Game Boy games at the time, they were some of the buggiest, most broken, most unbalanced games that ever did exist.
Sure.
And you could just consistently break the game. It's like the old Missing No was probably the most well-known glitch of all time, and it breaks your game.
It does. Yeah.
But people would go out of their way to go for it anyway.
Well, yeah.
But
most of us had two. Most of us had both, right? So we could like, I'll mess up my blue version because I got my red all good to go.
Yeah. And Gen 3, even though I think Gen 3 was probably the biggest technical advancement, because going from like the Game Boy Pocket, Game Boy Color to the Game Boy Advance made so much more possible. It was kind of like I didn't quite have the same hype, and that was kind of at the point when like it wasn't quite cool to like Pokemon, and it's like, okay, well, I'm not really having that same hype, so I'm not talking about it as much. And Gen 3, I was kind of just coasting along. Gen 4 came out, and originally, like, I didn't love Diamond and Pearl, but the Gen 4 discussion is an interesting one because, like, I think Diamond and Pearl are some of the worst Pokemon games, but then Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Platinum are some of the best.
Right.
So it's like they really, like, stumbled at the start of Gen 4, but then when the later games in Gen 4 came out, like those remakes of Gen 2 and the Platinum version, like that was when it's like, okay, my Pokemon hype is starting to come back again.
Fair enough. And I did not own a DS, so I ended up skipping quite a few generations.
Oh yeah, because Gen 4 and Gen 5 were both on DS, so. And Gen 5 was an interesting talk too, because people talk about it so fondly now, like they are like, oh, well, Gen 5 best story, like everybody loves it now. But when it first came out, people were really critical of it, like, oh, it's super linear, and since you can't use any past gen Pokemon, it's like all your favorites are like you have to kind of leave them behind until the post game. And like it was nice that they had all new Pokemon, but then they weren't well distributed, so it's like most of them were in the second half of the game, so everyone had kind of the same teams at the start. And like they had some real like level 50, level 60. I think there's like a level 64 evolution or something.
Wow.
I think it's Hydreigon.
They do that in Scarlet. I remember having to get somebody up there.
I will say though, in Gen 8 and 9, they made it significantly easier to level up.
Oh yeah.
With like the EXP candy. Like it used to just be like you had rare candy for an instant level, but then you can get like hundreds of EXP candy that if you want, you could just go to level 99 or level 100 and just like that.
Right. You just feed it all to one person. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially because like the raids are super popular because they're good for like catching things and for items and materials. So you'd get like so much EXP candy from doing those.
Absolutely.
And they're generally enjoyable because they're co-op. And Pokemon didn't really have a lot of co-op.
Well, it didn't have a lot of like players versus computer. It had a lot of like player versus player.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean though. Like it was very PvP focused. Like you're playing against other players, but not really cooperating with other players for like a common goal. Like everybody just wants to beat everybody else. But the raids, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying raids should be kind of catch-all, because I think certain games have kind of like leaned too far into the raids. Like I like the Gen 8 raids better than the Gen 9 raids personally, but that's a nuanced discussion because they both have their merits. But
sure,
I have strong feelings about Pokemon, and if you want some interesting lore that you might not know about me, I used to moderate for Cerebi.
The Pokemon website.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep. I did it for quite a few years, actually. But I ended up eventually, like, retiring from it. One, because it's, like, a completely voluntary position, and once I started doing, like, full-time work, I'm like, look, I don't have time for this anymore.
Right.
And two, Mr. Cerebi himself, like Joe Merrick, he can sometimes be a little much.
Fair enough.
But, you know, he lives for Pokemon, so I wish more power to him.
Right. Right. And I was just looking, what brought it up was I was looking at these, like I looked at Skizzer back there and Gengar and Bulbasaur, and I was just
I got a lot of plush. It's one of those things that I've collected. It's not just Pokemon too. Like, I could reach over here. And then
some Hollow Knight up there too.
Oh yeah. And then whoa, Mothman be upon ye. Yep.
He's kind of a cute Mothman.
Yep. It's from Persona and Shin Megami Tensei. So
okay, got you.
Yep. And then I could reach over here and then boom, Banjo-Kazooie.
Now that's a classic right there.
Oh yeah, I love Banjo-Kazooie. I love Super Mario 64 more, but the N64 era is just like a very nostalgic era for me.
Well, I mean, gosh, they were just a lot of the games that they were trying at the time were like, try it, see if it sticks, you know?
Yeah, but it's also, I'd argue that Nintendo 64 is probably the most influential era. Like, when you look at games like Super Mario 64 and The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, those games really just paved the future for the 3D era.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. And I loved that it was such like a, I like that I guess our generation were the ones that like really got to full on experience that. Mm-hmm. Like, I love the backwards thing with the Switch. Like, I think it's really cool. Like, it's nice. And I feel like they could just literally throw anything up there, but licensing, blah, 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 whatever. Yeah. And I thought about it, and I was like, but how cool that we got to like full on experience it. And we were looking at like Zelda and looking at it and going, wow, this is like the future. Like, look at these amazing graphics. And like,
yeah, I'd say honestly, I think the like Super Nintendo to N64 is probably the most significant jump, because like, I feel like we've kind of entered a series of diminishing returns where it's like, yes, the new systems have better graphics, but when you're just kind of just casually playing them, mm-hmm. like, it still looks beautiful. Like, when you're playing a game on a PS4, it still looks great. Like, obviously PS5 looks a little better, mm-hmm. but it's not like a night and day thing until you're like putting them side by side. Like, to the naked eye, you're not really seeing that effect as much.
Yeah, unless you're like specifically, like you said, like the side by side thing, which I'll see mm-hmm. on like TikTok and stuff like that every so often, or like then you also see like, I guess if you're like a designer, like if you like specifically like work on that kind of stuff,
right, you're not got that trained eye for it. Yeah. Right.
I like, there's very rarely a time like I could tell a difference, because I was sitting there playing Ragnarok and going like, yes, pretty, you know, looks great, but looks about the same as 2018 God of War. Like,
yep, pretty much.
But I guarantee that if someone out there was working on it and like told, and like I said that out loud, they'd be like, no, dude, look at all the improvements and blah blah. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I gotta be honest, I don't actually know what ray tracing does, like in terms of how it makes things look better. I hear the word thrown around a lot, but I don't know like the technical implications of ray tracing.
Couldn't tell you.
That's my confession. Yeah, that's my confession. But like, when you think of like going from Super Mario World to Super Mario 64, that's such a night and day difference. Like, not just how they looked, but how they played. Like, they completely reinvented it. Because I feel like in terms of gaming, like the industry as a whole, you look to what came before in order to make what comes next. And that's just normal. That's any industry.
Totally.
But with the transition to the 3D era, they had new technology that was capable of something that was never done before. So they kind of had to just completely reinvent the wheel. Like they didn't.
Yeah.
They couldn't just take a 2D Mario game and be like, okay, well, it's 3D now, but it's like, no, well, we have to translate that into 3 dimensions now. Like you're going up, down, left, right, rather than just left and right.
Absolutely.
And considering that it was like literally their first crack at it, they knocked it out of the park.
They did a pretty good job.
Yep.
A whole lot better than I could do.
Yeah, well, none of us are really programmers either, so.
I couldn't tell you. There might be some programmers in the audience. I don't know. Just definitely not something that I could make a difference doing. Like, I like the ideas that like sometimes you come up with, or like maybe those little changes here and there. Like we were literally talking about Final Fantasy 16 and the pacing of conversation being so goddamn slow. Like, listen, pick that up, literally shave like half a second.
Yep.
It's gonna add up to a lot of seconds because there's a lot of conversations in these games.
Yeah, I mean, there's little things that we could suggest too, but I always try to respect like the dev visions. Like, yes, there's certain things that I personally would like better, but at the same time, I don't know what goes into this. I don't know what goes into making a game. I couldn't make a game myself, so it's like I'm not gonna bite the hand that feeds me.
Oh yeah, I mean, bust out the RPG Maker, see what you can do. But like,
yeah, I don't think even then. Well, mind you, I've never used RPG Maker, so I have to learn RPG Maker. It's not to say I couldn't do it, like eventually.
sure,
But I feel like it's more time than I am willing and able to commit at this point.
that is 100% fair. You're like, I'm sure it's really cool, but I got that full-time gig and not necessarily something I want to try.
Yep. Like, it's one of those things, like you were mentioning earlier, like if you had all the time in the world, like that's another story, but we don't. We don't. We got bills to pay. We got work, jobs to do, so that we can pay those bills, and it's just a never-ending cycle.
That's a systematic problem.
Yep. Live to work or work to live.
Ugh. It's that you work to earn the right to live, to earn the right to die, basically.
Yep.
It's whatever that that phrase was.
Yeah. It's funny because like and school gets brought up and people are like, oh yeah, I don't miss school at all. And in a way, I kind of do miss it, but not necessarily the school work itself. I miss the concept of having like a well-defined end goal. Like, yes, you were always working in school, but it always had like a sequence of events that led to one thing or another. Like, you do the assignment so that you can get the grade. You do the homework so that you can pass the test, and you pass the test so that you can get the credits. You get the credits so that you can get the degree, and you get the degree so you can graduate. And it's like there was always a tangible end goal. But with working, it's just like, okay, you work so that you can survive, so you can continue working.
Right, so you can come back the next day.
Yep.
Continue doing it. And I feel like there are times when that I don't know, like, because I know that there are days when I'm like this job is so hard, and for whatever reason, like I happen to have like some of my hardest trauma clients that day, or because it's never planned. You know, I don't sit there and I go, oh well, I don't want to see this person and this person that day. Like I'll have to, nah. Like it's really difficult to kind of flip that kind of mindset a little bit, and hopefully, the hope is that one day everybody can do something that they really, really enjoy doing. Which I think, again, we go back to how we were like, well, like, how cool would it be to like just be able to like do this?
Yeah, I think in a perfect world, if I could do something I enjoyed and get paid for it, it would probably be reviewing games. Like, I like the actual process of reviewing the games. Like, I can still play the games on my own time, so it's not like the game itself is the work. But then it's like, okay, after I beat this game, I write up my thoughts and like say whether I would recommend it to people or not, put a number attached to it, like a number 1 through 10.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's something I enjoy.
So
But
you're talking
again,
like an IGN type review or like a video review type of thing?
hard to say because I could do either, but I think I like writing more than presenting.
Fair enough.
Mostly because it's easier to kind of get all my thoughts out with writing because I can kind of like double check what I'm doing rather than having to just kind of think it up on the fly. Even if I'm going on like a script, it's being able to actually convey it without like fumbling. And sometimes I fumble over my words because my brain moves faster than my mouth.
Heard.
Yeah.
Heard. That's my ADHD struggle a lot of the time. This moves a little too quickly sometimes for this to keep up.
Yeah, it can be challenging to say the least.
Yeah. Or sometimes this goes beforehand and then I'm like, whoa, where did that hang on? I have to like
Sometimes things get out of the filter without going through it.
right. And then luckily the filter is it's never like lets through like horrible, awful things, you know?
Yeah.
It's always just like that joke was that was not the appropriate time for a joke, Travis, you know?
Yeah.
Oh, they didn't mean to do that.
Hey, as long as you can recognize it too, because we're human, we make mistakes.
Oh yeah, no, I'm never. It's never malicious. I'm never like, but
Yep.
it's those times, and I've gotten better at it. But there are definitely times when, like, my brain thinks of a joke, and it's like in the middle of like talking about like someone's mom dying or something horrible, and I'm like, kid, can't make that joke right now.
Yeah. Good joke, but not the right time.
It's like fighting my inner jester, basically.
Yep. And I mean, different groups of people too, because some people,
Some people would love it.
Yeah, some people need that as kind of like a comfort, like it
Yes.
helps them cope. But then again, it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. It's not a one size fits all approach to people.
Absolutely, absolutely. Speaking of that last piece, just thought because Kefka popped into my head when I thought of inner jester. You said if 16 wasn't going to make the top 5.
Well, funny you mentioned Kefka because Final Fantasy VI is my number 1.
6 is fantastic.
6 was actually the game that got me into not just Final Fantasy, but JRPGs as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Like I played 6 was the first like true RPG that I played on the Super Nintendo. So after that I played 4. Well, mind you, at the time with the fucky localization of Final Fantasy, they localized 6 as 3 and 4 as 2. That's
Sure.
a whole ordeal. But I played Earthbound, I played Chrono Trigger, I played Secret of Mana, and it's like all that happened because of Final Fantasy 6. So yes, I'd probably still love the game regardless, but because of that nostalgic attachment and that it was my gateway to everything, it just holds a very special place in my heart.
Mm-hmm. So that's number 1.
Yep.
Number 1. Fantastic choice. Tara's my girl.
Yep. I love Terra.
And going down the list.
Okay, number 2 is actually the most recent addition that actually jumped to number 2 last year. It's actually Final Fantasy X.
10.
It bumped the previous number 2, which is now number 3, which is Final Fantasy 9.
Love 9.
I love 9 too.
Love 9.
But I feel like if I maybe replayed 9, it might go back to number 2. But it was something about
recency
10's
bias.
maybe, but I will say, 10 has probably my favorite turn-based combat in the series because it lets you switch party members mid-battle without losing a turn.
Yes.
And that was huge because I feel like it makes it so enemies can have much more varied strategies because you don't run into any situation where, okay, if you didn't bring this party member, then you're basically soft locked and you can't do anything.
Right.
So instead, it's like, okay, you can pretty much freely adjust your party to deal with different situations, and different party configurations are going to deal better with different enemies. So I think that strategy angle really is what elevated it so high, because I used to think I was fairly standard with this, but after getting on Twitch, I realize most people rate story over gameplay in terms of significance to them personally. But for me,
For Final Fantasy?
just the games in general.
Okay.
But for me, it's always been gameplay is just a little more important. Like, don't get me wrong, I get super attached to these game stories, to their characters, etc. But I would rather play a game that's fun, that has like no story or even a bad story,
Sure,
as opposed to something that maybe has the best story ever, but I don't enjoy the gameplay.
Right.
So,
because bad gameplay can ruin a great story.
yep. But then again, I think it kind of depends on the game too, and the genre.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Final Fantasy X kind of hit both of those for me, where I like the story, I like the characters, and I like the gameplay, because it was like that evolution of the turn-based system where it added a wrinkle that wasn't just superficial. Like,
Right.
you can talk about like Final Fantasy VII adding limit breaks, but for me that was just kind of it was an evolution of a system that existed in 6 with like the desperate attacks, but instead it had like a visual bar now.
Right.
Yep. But I just think 10 just hit all the right notes at all the right times for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. 10,
Maybe I'd go back to putting 9 at 2 if I replayed it. But I do remember certain parts of 9 were, kind of dragged a little bit. Whereas with 10, I felt, 10 is fairly linear, but I feel like it always keeps a story very focused.
Yeah.
Like, it's linear up until the end. Like, the very final act is when it finally is like, okay, you can go basically anywhere now.
True. Yeah, where you hear "Yeehaw, here we go" many times.
Yeah, basically.
Basically. Yeah, I mean, I the thing that gets me a lot of the time specifically with Final Fantasy games is like theming. Don't get me wrong, absolutely story and gameplay are important. Final Fantasy IX's theme of growth and changing into who you truly feel like you are is such like a cool thing for me. And that's just like totally personal. Like, I love that idea of changing and evolving into who you are truly.
And I agree. Like, Final Fantasy IX is beautiful thematically, but I also love that it's just one big love letter to the series. Like, very much a return to classic themes. You see a lot of throwbacks to like the older games.
Yep.
Like, even some of the lesser known games, like they'll have like a random story mention, like a character is telling you a story, and it's about a character from Final Fantasy II, which is very much the black sheep of the series.
Yeah, that's fair. So that's top 3.
Yep.
Do you keep going?
Oh yeah. Now, number 4 and number 5 on the list are, ironically, Final Fantasy IV and Final Fantasy V. And sometimes they're kind of interchangeable.
Sure.
I think 5 has more depth to its gameplay, but 4 is just so nostalgic for me. And personally, if somebody had never played Final Fantasy before, like as a series, and they asked me which Final Fantasy game should I start with, I would always recommend Final Fantasy IV to them. I think it is the best entry point to the series. Like, again, I'm not going to say like spoilers about it, but I feel like the story is very focused in a way where it's not like trying to be too convoluted. It's not like super basic like the way Final Fantasy 1 was.
Yeah.
But it still is very easy to follow while introducing you to like staples of the series, like elemental fiends, crystals, things like that. Like, it's very encompassing to Final Fantasy as a series. Like, you have your summoners, your black mages, your white mages, and throughout the story, like every part of the game, you don't have to pick your party or their jobs. Like, it basically gives you everything you need to win every battle, but it's up to you to execute. So that's what I find makes it very easy to get into, because while I do love the battle system of 5, I always say that Final Fantasy 3 walked so that Final Fantasy 5 could run, but it can be tricky to excel at 5 if you're not super familiar with the job system and you're not really like good at making a really well balanced party of jobs, and you can come into a battle where you've set up all the wrong jobs and then you get screwed and it leaves you soured. But
Yeah.
I do love the depth of 5, and 5 has some of my favorite tracks, like Battle on the Big Bridge. Just that music just fucks. But Final Fantasy V is great, underrated as hell too, because it never originally got localized, and I feel like 5, the fact that it got localized like after Final Fantasy VII released kind of doomed it to obscurity, because yes, it got a release on PlayStation, but it was after 7, and 7 took the world by storm. So it's like that became the lens by which people would judge Final Fantasy games. So when you have people that are going and playing 5 on the PlayStation, it's like, well, this little pixel game after we just had our first real instance of like these cutscenes that are like fully animated, because that it really hadn't been done before.
Right, pre-rendered stuff, yeah.
Yeah, so it was just, it felt like it was definitely like given a bad hand. But it's just, I love Final Fantasy V, and I wish more people got to experience it, but I do appreciate now with the Pixel remaster that more people are getting to appreciate it.
Yeah, and even just, yeah, as simple as that. So you're saying, what I'm hearing is Stranger in Paradise #1.
I actually did go through Stranger Paradise for the first time earlier this year.
I'm always like, it's really not bad, just pick it up at a discount.
Yeah, I'd say it's good, but it's not great. And to be honest, that's how I feel about a lot of that studio's games. Like Team Ninja makes really good games, but a lot of them fall short of greatness. And that's fine. Not every game has to be a Game of the Year contender.
Right.
And I think it's one of those things that's kind of, I don't want to say like it's like cursed the industry, but it's like too many people definitely feel like if a game isn't a 10 out of 10 Game of the Year contender, then it's just a bad game. It's like, no, you can still be like, you can still have a game that's great, it's fun to play, but it's not going to be like, it's not going to win Game of the Year.
Yeah, it doesn't have to. Like,
and I think that whole mentality of like ratings and awards, it's kind of made it so like, I think the best example of this is like Spider-Man 2. Like, obviously a great game, but it won nothing at the Game Awards.
Right.
But does that mean it's not a good game? No, absolutely not.
No, it's really good. Very enjoyable.
Just, yeah, this last year was such a stacked year with so many of these great games coming out. But I'd like to say last year was a great year for gaming, but I think it was a great year for the consumers, not a great year for the industry with all the layoffs and everything. Yes. So that's a whole topic. Like, the gamers who are playing the games definitely won, but the people who were actually part of the industry did not.
Well, I feel like, because I remember thinking and talking with somebody about something very similar to like, yeah, the games this year have been just like top notch. And then all that layoffs and stuff happened. I'm like, that's going to affect everything in the future.
Yeah.
It's going to continue to affect things going forward. So where things are either going to take longer or it's going to be subpar stuff.
Yeah, because when those people exit the industry, the people that are making those games great are not there for the future.
Right. And there's only so many places that they can work.
Like, I get it. There's always going to be like the top people who like have the job security forever. Like your Nomura's or your Yoshi P's, like their jobs are set in stone. They're never going to lose their job to the industry changes. But then all the people who are like on the ground level and are doing like a lot of the individual animating or the individual programming, those are the ones who are like at risk most to lose their jobs. And that sucks, because without those people, a lot of these games wouldn't be possible.
Yeah. Or they are possible. They just take longer to create.
Yeah, like the dev cycles for games have definitely increased a lot. Like when you think of like the N64 and PS1 era, like you had 3 mainline Final Fantasy games in 4 years.
Yeah, they could pump them out,
and they were all great games. They were all great games too.
Yeah.
Like Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9. Like no one's gonna say they're bad games or they were rushed or like they were subpar. It's just the the technology I think has changed too, where as things get bigger and more impressive looking, it also needs more time to make it happen.
Yes.
Like it takes less time to grill a hamburger than it does to grill a giant hunk of, like a giant steak.
Yeah, true.
So yeah.
True. And I made burgers tonight, so 100%.
I'll probably have burgers over the weekend.
They were, you know what? Burgers like one of those things that ends up becoming a comfort food for me because it's just it's quick, but like not so quick that it's like kind of boring or anything. It's just like,
yeah, and it feels like a meal.
Yeah.
Like not just something you just stick in like the oven for 10 minutes or something, but no, like it's plus I think the grill hits different too.
Oh, yeah. There's some about just like seeing the marks and stuff like that. Oh yeah, 100% with you. 100% with you. And if I mean, I don't have this because the complex we live in doesn't allow charcoal, but like there's some about charcoal too, you know?
Yeah, the smokiness.
Mm-hmm. But you can't.
One thing that
go ahead.
I was gonna say one thing that does help if you can't use charcoal is wood chips. Like a lot of these grill places will sell the wood chips that from like pine, cherry, cedar, and those are really good at getting that smoky flavor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Big smash burger fan for homemade. Yeah, dude.
Smash burgers are nice, but you kind of need that. I feel like smash burger works better on like a flat griddle, but you know, still can't go wrong.
Well, I mean, both can work, and I mean it's obviously harder, but I have one of those like plates that you can put in the grill.
Really?
Yeah, it kind of just looks like a cookie sheet, honestly, but it's like it's just like this plate that you can put inside the grill, so you can have like room for actual like putting on the plate or the what the hell is that word?
Yeah.
What's the word for just like the grilly thingies?
I know what you're talking about, but like the word is escaping me.
That's what I'm saying. I'm like,
I'm having that brain fart where it's like you can visualize it in your mind, but not attach a word to it.
Right. But I don't want to call it just yeah. Okay, we'll take it grilly thingies. But yeah, it's basically just like a cookie sheet. So you can still have like that flavor and whatnot of like a grill, but like, and still do it on the grill if you want to. So you make smash burgers on that, and the smash burger wouldn't just like fall through.
Yeah. Well, the other thing too is I think that when you're doing the smash burger, like on on grates, then you lose a lot of the juices in that way too. Whereas like on a flatter surface, it's just kind of sitting in its own juices and. That's continuing to flavor it.
Oh yeah, no, that's why that little cookie sheet, grill sheet, whatever you want to call it, thing is it's perfect. And you throw the buns on that little top rack. I don't know if you have that, but like the little top rack, so you get a little toasty on there. Ooh, I still got more burger down there. I might.
You love to see it. Can't go wrong with burger.
Right. That might be I work from home tomorrow. That might be lunch.
Okay. Got it. Might as well eat it.
You know what? Why wouldn't you? And why wouldn't you? Well, I want to say thank you so much for being a part of this today. I really appreciate you working with me with the not technical difficulties we had, YouTube.
Well, thank you for having me, and technical difficulties that we didn't have, YouTube, were 100% not your fault.
Yeah, it's and you know, it's just one of the, it's like I don't feel like you're a Twitch streamer if you've never had technical problems.
I like to say that the mark of a true streamer is having a scuffed stream.
Yeah. There's like a little bit of like scuffing, right? Just a little bit. Can't go too hard on the scuffing, but if you get a little bit up in there, it's like the flavoring from previous grilling.
Exactly.
It's like, ooh, a little bit of leftover burnt garlic salt. I'm in.
Yep. Adds flavor.
Adds flavor. If you've been in chat, chilling and watching this guy, you should definitely check him out. Hardcore challenger streamer, but also big lover of story-based games. Way better and bigger gamer than you would ever give yourself credit for. I know you would.
Just do my best. That's all I can do.
And your best is incredible.
Thank you.
Because obviously hitless runs and ruin level 1s and all that stuff. That stuff's really difficult.
It's a challenge, but I think for me, it's always been like, you want to see what you can do. You never
Push
know
those limits.
Yep.
Push those limits. Absolutely. Absolutely. So make sure you're following Mr. Travis over here. And I appreciate you for being on the show today. Do you have somebody we should raid out to?
Oh, well. Okay.
Also in chat, there's all my stuff too.
All right. Yes, I do actually have someone that I think we could raid.
Okay.
They are a friend of mine. I'll put their spelling in the Discord chat so that you can have it.
Sure.
All right. Their name is Pocket Cuckoos. Yes, it is a Zelda-inspired name. And they're okay. Remember how when we were talking earlier, I mentioned that a friend of mine like got me onto Twitch to kind of meet people?
Mm-hmm.
That's the person who I was talking about.
Perfect.
So yeah, it's kind of like bringing things full circle.
Well, I love that.
They're one of like my longest and oldest friends.
Perfect. We are. Oh, and they're playing a Tails game. Ooh, Vesperia. All right.
Yep.
Good choice.
Yeah,
Good
she's
choice.
a big fan of Tails games. She does her Tails Tuesdays.
See, I will admittedly, I love my girl Velvet, man. Like,
Berseria is good. Verseria's, I think, was a nice, like, return to form after Zestiria was, not the most well-received Tails game.
It was not. And I like to Rise as well.
Rise is good. I think Arise is a step in the right direction for the future of Tails games.
Yeah, I actually I got COVID for the first time and I just played Arise. Between naps, basically, I just was like playing and then I'd like fall asleep while I was playing and then like the guy would just be like in the corner like and I was like, whoops.
That was me with Persona 5 Royal when it came to PC for the first time because I still didn't have my PlayStation then. Mm-hmm. I got really sick. It wasn't COVID, but I got like really sick at that time. So I was basically home and it's like, well, I've got nothing to do. Let's start this 100-hour RPG.
Absolutely.
Yep.
All right.
That's who I would recommend we raid today.
Well, we're doing it.
Okay. Let's do it.
We're doing it. Start that raid up.
All right. Do we have any kind of raid message or anything, or do we just say?
Well, I usually do my raid out thing, but whatever.
Okay.
You can use my raid emotes, your own raid emotes, somebody else's raid emotes. Again, I don't really give a shit. But it is important that you let Pocket Cuckoos know here that Travis sent you, and who knows what that's gonna mean. I'm pretty sure I actually follow. I'm pretty sure I actually follow them on Twitter, which is so funny.
It's possible. Ooh, I like Aaron's raid message.
There you go. Use that one. Absolutely. I'm just gonna steal that one.
Yep.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, thank you again for having me. This was
Absolutely,
a lot of fun.
friend. This will be on YouTube in about 2 weeks or so. So make sure that you are checking that out, and we will see you very soon on the other side of this raid.
All right. See you on the other side.